current challenge we have.
Yeah.
Our first lighthouse can trace back to 2019, and so far we have built, internally we have 9 lighthouse factories, and we see each lighthouse is a milestone for our company transformation. Back in 2019, I remember that lighthouse factory is the first end-to-end automation line. So the focus will be how to improve the labor productivity. And then the second is, I remember back in 2021, and we realized that just automation is not enough. So we need to start to introduce AI. So our first AI will be focused on predictive maintenance and the machine vision inspection. So we also introduced AI technologies in large scale in one of our very important business, like the enclosure for smartphones. So we have introduced machine vision in very large scale, and replaced a lot of human operators. And starting from that, we realized, okay, if we're going to scale, we have to scale, roll out the AI applications, and we need a very systematic AI infrastructure. So we think about what is the current IT stack we have. And then in 2022, we have another lighthouse factory, but that one is for our server business. That is very different because that is very typical high mix but low volume. So we realize that the logistic and also material scheduling is very important. And that is a core bottleneck for our on-time OTD and also our time to market. So we start to look into how we can accelerate our engineering design process and how we can make our material management more efficient. So that's also another focus. And then 2023, when we have to expand our global operation, and our factory in Vietnam faced the challenge of the supply chain resilience. Because at that time, 95% of our suppliers are offshore. So we have to think, also the skill, the local labor skill also is not very compatible with the engineers in China. So our focus is in how to do proactive scheduling and how to do a supply chain kind of control tower, and also how to empower the local engineers. And so we introduced some of the augmented AI, and also I remember that's when the OpenAI first launched its large language model. So actually the first large language model application introduced in FII was in Vietnam. So to assist the machine maintenance practice. So basically, if you trace back into every lighthouse factories, that put a very important a milestone on our company transformation. And every time the lighthouse factories set up a very good benchmark, and the rest of the factories will follow. So I think this is how we use that as a very important kind of transformation engine to also get our business grow.
That's very interesting. Actually, I have a follow-up question on that about how do you convince top leadership of companies to implement these changes? But we'll hold that thought for now because I do want to hear from the rest. And I know, for example, Annie, you also have been helping some of your clients clinch the lighthouses as well.
Totally. I come from a little bit of a different perspective because we're really proud at Laminar to have supported our customer factories to actually have been obtained and awarded the World Economic Forum Global Lighthouse, which is the most prestigious and highest award for any manufacturing facility in the world as a key technology project. And I think that's something that's very important for us as a core philosophy in how we approach manufacturing AI at Laminar, but also we've seen this translated in the field in our customers' facilities is the need to be very disciplined in having extremely tight problem statements. And everything we do at Laminar ties to key KPIs that impact P&L, which is, for instance, OEE improvement, auxiliaries reduction, utilities reduction, chemical reduction, consumption reduction, for instance, and beyond. And so the importance of deploying technology that is turnkey, end-to-end, drops in and drives value immediately with very little need of continuous training or continuous, a lot of operator investment in order to achieve value. But most importantly, highly quantifiable and highly attributable return on investment on core use cases and problem statements in the manufacturing operations process. So if you look at AI in manufacturing, actually the biggest EBITDA impact of AI in a manufacturing organization is actually in operations. But it's also one of the biggest challenges, how do you actually deploy and scale AI solutions in actual real core operations? That's what we fundamentally think a lot about at Laminar. And when we come about and think about supporting our partners in Global Lighthouse, for instance, we're doing changeover optimization, which is one of the biggest cause of losses in operations is changeovers, and making one product and switching to make another product on the same manufacturing line. And so at Laminar, we're the #1 solution in the world for changeover and clean in place optimization. And so that's just one example of very tight value proposition, dropping in, immediately driving value in a highly quantifiable way. And being very disciplined in that approach enables that, hey, this is not just a gimmick, this is not just like a story, but it's actually creating real value for real operations continuously and doing it in a highly agile and also flexible and hyper-scalable way.
Yeah, well, let me put it this way, right? I think that we learned the Lighthouse lesson for the last almost 10 years now, right? Since 2018. Typically, there are two things we have to focus. Number one is productivity. Any lighthouse, doesn't matter, it's like 5 use cases, 6 use cases, you gotta have a KPI, right? Productivity, quality, efficiency, resilience, sustainability, whatever. KPI, baseline, you have to build. Second thing, competitiveness. Are you making money? Are you doing better than your competitors? I have seen some lighthouse, they're bankrupt too. I don't want to mention a company name, but so therefore, you're productive, but you're not competitive, you're in trouble, right? The third thing, if you make lighthouses now, can you attract more young people to your company now? Because manufacturing, we all know, is a repeating job. If you don't have a young brain come to your company, you will not last long, for sure, I guarantee you. If you believe manufacturing is a noble profession, you got to attract young people who can very passionate to work for you. If you cannot do that, we're in wrong business. So we have to do productivity, number one, competitiveness, number two, and future talent, number three. The 3 legs, if we miss one, that's not stable. I believe we have learned from 238 lighthouse since Monday, yesterday, 15 more. I think there are a lot of lessons we learned, right? But we have to look at lighthouse as a contagious learning lesson. Culturally, yes, we agree. This is 100% right direction. Now, strategically, it's not to repeat what other people have done, but you have to create a new way to be unique. Even small companies, right? Even the different type of company, not just factory. Could be a facility, could be fleet, could be a field. Like one of the lighthouses they announced yesterday was for the port, right?
Yeah.
The port, yeah. It's not about factory. It's I call 4F. Factory, facility, fleet, and field. There's 4F. They all can build lighthouses one day, right?
Okay,
to me,
so
that's the innovative way to do it. Yeah.
3 legs and the 4 Fs. Ms. Xie, what are some of the best practices?
Professor Lee's opinion. Our Lighthouse factory journey starts from 2018, the first patch of the Lighthouse, I think. Till now, we have 15 in higher group. We have 15 factories, Lighthouse factories in higher group, which covered our main business like refrigerator, washing machine, logistic, and also water machine, something like this. We have a different kind of division, and they all have this kind of a pioneer in their country, in their factories to lead in the industry. I think this is the first thing. And we also give our practice and also the experience to our customer. We also support and help them to pass also the lighthouse certificate as well, because we have a lot of experience in the lighthouse, how to get a lighthouse. I think lighthouse certificate is not a destination for a factory, but it's a capability you need to survive in this commercial world. So that's why I echo to Professor Lee's opinion, because the productivity and also the quality control and sustainability, these are all kind of different ways you can compete with in this market. But the thing is, you need to survive in your competition. That's the key. Another thing is that the lighthouse factory, there is a very, I think it's very systematic operation system. I think everybody can visit the Lumina, similar pronunciation of the company, Lumina, yeah.
Yes.
And I think there is a lot matrix and also very detailed introduction about every function and all the factories that you can learn from them. There are over 226, I think, 26 or 25 already. So that's actually a very useful database everybody can visit. And then, and also, maybe you can join the Global Lighthouse Network and you can share and engage more what you think, what you do. I think it's a lot more helpful for everybody to gain more confidence in your industry, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Professor Lee, you talked about the need to remain competitive while being able to attract the right talent. And I want to link it with what's happening in China right now, which is very elevated youth unemployment rates, AI displacement of jobs, and that's something the government, I think, is starting to get worried about. And in your organizations, how do you balance, do you see the structural mismatch between the talents that you need and the talent that is available? And have you had to make very painful decisions to maybe cut jobs because of the productivity gains?
Well, I can kind of maybe clarify a few things. Well, normally the productivity, I mean, you cut those waste out first. So, I mean, redundant work, redundant labor, redundant task, non-value added, those are number one. So you get those things out, right? Next, find those high value added work. Big automation is for those to do people don't want to do or don't do well. Intelligent system to do things people cannot do. If I have to use an eye to do inspection, 1 second, 1/10 second, AI can inspect 1,000 features. Human being cannot do. So those are high value added work. That's the new talents. Those low hanging fruits, retraining. So we need a balance about talents. We have a legacy workforce, can make them focus on the priority and the more value creation. Then you got a new talent you bring in to create new value. Right, two different things. One is totally, you need to blend them well, so eventually you create a good new culture, new organization. And eventually you can bring new young people in, even young, passionate, not just young, right, by the way, and new outside people in, or train inside, right? That's a very positive way to think, not just depend on some new technologies.
Yeah. Anyone else have something to share?
Yeah, I think, from our side, I think we're in life science tools, so our systems are really critical to test therapeutics. So every medicine is probably tested in our equipment, both from the quality control, but the research and development side. And the workforce, it's how the organization is going to be reshaped. And I'm a really big believer in human potential and of learning organizations that can adapt and do different things. And these new technologies that come in allow that development. But I think it's really important to think that technology isn't being done to the workflow force. The technology enables the workflows to do different things. And in scientific operations, companies can be very siloed. They can have operations, R&D, commercial, quality, so it's much beyond just operations. And what we found through transformation, actually, if you don't fix the process first and you load the technology on suboptimal processes, you get very little return on that. So looking at end-to-end processes that link with research and development to the production to quality is really, really important. And, you know, I think when we've studied transformation, we've done a big transformation of the company, you can see that it's not only about the technology, but people pilot something and then it kind of pilots in isolation but doesn't scale across the organization. So true transformations are really looking at scale across your data backbone and also the skills that you need to accelerate that going forward, and that's what true transformation is. But there is a cultural element to this. When you hear people talk about AI, you spend $1 on the technology, $2 on the change management, and $4 on the data, you know, ultimately on how that costs. But the cultural change within companies should not be underestimated. About learning new things, doing more from customers, and actually aspiring to be better each and every day. And some of the most ingenious things have come not just from AI, but from our workforce really working on products.
I'll also jump in here as well. At Laminar, we think a lot about what is the future of a factory floor worker. And maybe before diving into that question, I think it's really interesting right now. We see a couple macro conditions that are really driving and being tailwinds for the adoption of AI in manufacturing, one of which is labor, in a way that, and of course this differs in geographies in different areas of the world, but especially in a lot of US, for example, Europe and beyond. Actually, one of the biggest pain points is the risk of loss of skilled labor, in a way that if you go walk into a factory, especially in process manufacturing, I talked a little bit about why, right? Like the way that we're currently running our critical systems are oftentimes done like static automation, this hard-coded recipes, for instance, in which someone from 10 years ago, for instance, had a partner that came and developed this recipe, and it's these shop floor workers who are incredible and experts in what they do, and that should be appreciated and respected and recognized by technology and by the work that we're all doing. But these are the people who have been running these shop floors the past 20, 30 years. And if you walk into a factory, it's, okay, Bill can smell if something's wrong or hear if something's wrong, but no one actually knows what's actually going on, especially I mentioned in process manufacturing, where things are happening behind a stainless steel reactor or a stainless steel pipe or equipment, for instance. And what that means is also, looking at these macro conditions, a big challenge that global manufacturers are facing is these same operators who've been running the same shop floors the past 20 years, who are experts in what they do, are also at risk of losing this skilled labor in the next 3 to 5 years, if not now. And I think about one of our partners, and we were talking with them, and they actually mentioned employee turnover and operator turnover is one of the biggest challenges they're facing, in which 40% of their shop floor operators have only been there for 1 year. And so you have people who, and this risk of loss of this skilled labor on this institutional knowledge that have been developed over decades of operations from these static hard code in the PLCs, for instance, that are running these critical operations. And how are we going to continue operating our mission-critical infrastructure that make everything we eat, we use, we wear, if the people who are operating this may not be here in the next 3 to 5 years who know how to do this? And so when we think about technology and people, ultimately, our perspective at Laminar, what's the future of a factory floor worker, is that we need to develop technologies that complement, that augment, that support people. And when you think about sustainability, it's sustainability for business, as in productivity and efficiency. It's sustainability for the environment, but it's also sustainability for people. And that's really important to think about, where, hey, it's actually oftentimes the opposite problem of what the industry is facing. And we need to be developing technologies that serve people, that serve the shop floor, that serve operations, serve the engineering, serve the physics and the foundational chemistry behind how our processes work. And that's what we're doing here at Laminar in our philosophy and how AI works with people.
And I'm wondering for those of you who are based in China, do you find a mismatch between the labor that you need and the labor that's available? Like if you have an advice to a fresh grad right now, what should they be studying and what should they be preparing for?
Sorry, you want to? Sorry, I just stuck on your question, please.
My question is also, it's linked to the displacement of job, because a lot of companies have been quietly laying off people or they're not renewing contracts. So what is your advice to a fresh grad or a young person, trying to find a job and the economy is so rapidly changing?
Okay, I was just thinking of the future job, because I just remember, I recorded a number that in 2025, there's a report just from the WEF, that's the future job of 2025 to 2030. I think that's a very interesting number. There are 22% of the job role will be reshaped.
Yeah.
So, echo your question. I think this is the very tough question for top management for all our industries.
Yeah.
The one thing is that for young people who want to join our industry, I think you need to show up your passion in AI, because now almost every job involved with AI. I think no matter you are engineer, no matter you are good at like data analysis, everything. I think so. This is the passion you need to show. And then another thing that you might maybe deep dive into some like physics, which is very important for like manufacturing. Yeah, we always say that from the smiling curve, the generative AI is very easy to do either in the promotion part, the both side, but in the bottom part, that's the tough part of the whole curve. I think also very big challenge and also very big chance for everybody to explore deeper in this part. So I think maybe young people can focus more on this part. I think that's my suggestion. And another one is that for those people who already work in the industry, I think we need to innovate ourselves as well. We need to learn to be a better one as well. I don't know other companies, but in our company, in Hire, in 2025, our CEO and the chairman, he started a program that we call the Year One of AI in 2025. It didn't mean that we don't use any AI technology before that. He just want to set the flag, let everybody know that you need to involve more. And you can, and we also have some programs for young people to compete, whether you can use the AI technology to improve your work, your job, the efficiency or the quality as well. So it's quite interesting. In 2026, we started another one, Year One in Agent, which means that it's a step forward as well.
Yeah.
So I think this we can see the culture thing you mentioned. I think it's very, very important. And also, this is the power of the whole organization, and this is strategic thinking, which part you want to invest your resources. Yeah.
Padraig, you mentioned something interesting earlier about how many companies sometimes get stuck with using intelligent manufacturing, maybe in a specific unit or an isolated use case. What distinguishes those from the ones that are able to scale it system-wide across their organizations?
Not working on the basic painful things that need to be fixed. There's nothing glamorous in having one data set across the company and having, if you can, an ERP system. There's nothing glamorous about having, your training scaled across the company. So, and by the way, people can optimize processes brilliantly for their own function. I'm going to be the best operations, but I'm not going to optimize the quality at the end, or I'm not going to optimize R&D that has MSAC configurations around the system. So taking the painstaking time to map end-to-end processes and really look at what that new process is like, and reimagining that is really, really important. And I've seen that over and over again as one of the biggest barriers to scaling transformation and leaving things as pilots. The other thing I was just following on from your comment, for anybody coming into the industry, there is really one thing that needs to be really looked at for every employee, and it's really around learning, agility, and curiosity. The really human trait of learning, agility, and curiosity is there is no training course at the end of the day that can be effective if people aren't curious about how things can be reshaped. You hear companies talking about reshaping jobs, new skills, but having that learning, agility, and curiosity is really important.
Mr. Liu?
Right. Well, first, I think, like for all the lighthouse leaders, and I think you already, on top of that is we should be business-driven instead of technology-driven. So, like, if you look at the lighthouse white papers, and you will find, like for each lighthouse, there's a change story. So that address what the business challenges they are facing and how they solve that. And you will see, most of them are focused on a very specific transformation challenge, right? And also their core business competitiveness, how they can grow that, how they can upgrade that in order to adapt to new kind of like a market competition environment. So I think if you have that in mind, then you have a clear goal to set a like the KPI for operational or financial indices, and also tie that with your digital solutions. And usually I find out that the companies who have a very good change story usually achieve much better financial outcomes, as well as more innovative and practical use cases. So I think that is the one thing we should also keep in mind. And the second is, I think, usually is a systematic framework, and the technology platforms are also very important. We need to spend some effort, even though that does not come up with immediate paybacks, for example, like the dollar counts. But actually, you realize that like the effort or the investment on data governance, on the IT stack like refine, that will help a lot in your later rollout process. And also, I think the organizational enablement is also very important. So we should always think how to upskill the employees and also encourage less agile and the learning environment, because usually still we depend on people, because even though we have all the AI, all the new tools, but we still depend on people to identify where are the opportunities to innovate new ideas. So I think people upskilling is also very important.
What are the biggest barriers or enablers for scaling intelligent manufacturing?
Well, I think that one of the biggest things that Lighthouse Network, global Lighthouse Network done is to create very diversified benchmarking platform. I remember, well, this is what back 2013 when Germany first introduced Industry 4.0, remember? And we attended many meetings. But for some reason, every company have their own definition about Industry 4.0. There's no one definition. So 2017, when WEF kicked off, start making this as a global community and create such a learning platform, which is today, I believe, 238 lighthouses site. They are big enough for anybody to improve the state of your work, right? I think WEF is called to improve the state of a world. Then Lighthouse will be improve the state of a manufacturing. Where you are, the baseline, improve, right? From where you are, find the gaps, improve. From the R, and so eventually, I think to make the Lighthouse more scalable, there are two steps. Number one, to learn from the past, what people have done. And second, how to do better and faster and cheaper. If I take my first lighthouses, $1 million, my second lighthouse should be $500,000. The third one should be $150,000. If every lighthouse you take the same amount of money, something wrong. Yes, I mean, that should be more efficient. You can help other people.
I think something else as well, I'm reflecting back on what are most successful partners have done in scaling solutions across their operational fleet. And so I'll give one example. Firstly, at Laminar, we work with multinational enterprise Fortune 500 companies with hundreds of factories in their operational fleet. I think of one in which we scaled from 1 factory to 6 factories to 60 factories globally in the span of 1.5 years. And so when I think about how that happened, there's a couple key factors of success, which is number one, we need to think at the end goal and then backtrack to what we need to do to get that end goal. And so, we talked about this earlier, where change management is a cost. So if you're running any project in an organization, whether it's AI or not, you will always have a cost of just the work of executing that project, right? And that work is non-negligible, it's non-zero. And so sitting down, just say you're endeavoring on starting a project, and how do we actually scale this across the operational fleet? It's important to know that, hey, the only way we are going to be able to make our time worth it as a team, like us and the factory, us and the manufacturing organization, is if we scale impact across the entire operational fleet. And if we end up just doing a pilot or a lighthouse in one line or one site, for example, or 1 or 2 sites, that'll be great in driving impact, of course, and payback, but where we're going to achieve that true ROI is if we scale this. And so having that as a North Star before we even begin, and saying, okay, what does it take to get there? And how do we design step 1, step 0, with the intention of getting there? Versus saying, hey, like, we're just going to do this first immediate pilot in this one line or this one site, and then we won't even think about that until after this. And by that time, it's too late. By the time maybe you realize we deployed this in the wrong site, for example. I say this, this phrase that everyone has is not invented here syndrome, where it's like, oh, this worked in this business unit, but will it work in mine? Oh, it worked in this region, but will it work in mine, for instance? And everyone always has that. And so we need to be very intentional in starting this journey of, okay, if this is the end goal and this is what's going to make our time truly worth it, how do we think ahead and have that foresight when we're starting from day one and addressing all of the key open items and questions, aligning all the stakeholders on a top-down level, on getting the bottom-up buy-in of the shop floor operators to execute this process and this project with alignment, so then we can rapidly scale to get there and ultimately achieve hundreds of millions of dollars of impact and ROI for our organization. And so that's something that is oftentimes very challenging, but when we come in with this very intentional framework and approach, this is really when we see this true impact happening at scale.
All right, so we don't have much time left. So as we draw to a close, I would like to hear from each of you, what is one key message you want to leave the audience with, or if you have a call to action that you want to share with the people here today?
I think the future factory, I don't think it's going to be defined by how much we automate. People get over-focused on that. It's really going to be about how we effectively use the technology to elevate human capability. I really believe that. And people, if they look at the problem through the human lens rather than the automation lens, I think you get a huge amount of abundance.
I think we should set correct expectations for AI. Because currently we always compare like the humanoid robots or agentic AI with the existing like automated system, and you will find that compared to automated machine, it's not that efficient, and compared to human workers, it's not that flexible. So, and if you keep comparing that, and basically we have risk of missing the great future opportunities, because we believe that AI is a augmented tool. It's not a replacement of people, or even not a replacement of automated machine, because I think even in future, like the automation still have its role to play. But if you set a correct expectation for AI as a amplifying tool for human productivity, for example, like in future, like if one person can manage like several agents, task agents or humanoid robots, and you can see that is an amplifier of its productivity. And also it can be can tokenize their knowledge and experience. So that can make our make AI more and more mature, and also make the, for the first time, the enterprise can have its, like the growing digital assets. And that may even create like new business model. So I think the fundamental is that we should focus on, like, for example, the large language model, and also for humanoid, it's like the VLA model. And we know that it will take time, but actually if we set up the correct expectations and we keep investing, and also we gradually find appropriate work for AIs to do. And I would say that very soon we're gonna hit to a sweet point where we balance the efficiency, flexibility, and also the system resilience. So I think, right, so we cannot just compare them with the existing technologies, but find its correct position.
Yeah. Okay. I think the most important thing I want to summarize is that, just like I mentioned before, people are the purpose. So the word maybe we can use people, human in loop. It's not the narrow meaning of it's a original one, because that's a procedure. The people will make the decision, not the original meaning. I mean, it's a bigger one. People are the purpose. No matter how advanced technology we will use, how many AI agents we are use, the purpose, the destination is the better life, better product for your customer. I think this is the key. Okay.
The single highest leverage thing that a manufacturing enterprise can do is changing from this is all the reasons it won't work and this is why we shouldn't do this, to let's make it happen mentality.
Yeah.
And that is by far the most common thread in our most successful partners who have done this at scale. And so when we change, and oftentimes, right, these are big enterprises with lots of stakeholders, with lots of different levels, a lot of different parties who are involved. And if we come in with a mutual understanding of fundamentally the shift from, hey, like, this is why this won't work, to let's make it happen. How do we make it happen? That is single-handedly the biggest catalyst. Because what happens is, like, the honest answer is there will be roadblocks. There will be challenges that happen along the way. And we come in with the let's make it happen mentality. You build that resilience, that foresight into the North Star of what's actually going to achieve the greatest ROI single-handedly for this entire organization. And we have that let's make it happen mentality. That's when true innovation happens. That's when productivity happens, efficiency happens, sustainability happens. And we're able to actually create true impact for organizations at scale.
Well, manufacturing has been good tech and good job, good pay. Sometimes low pay, sometimes. But if we believe the global lighthouse network, this lighthouse journey is truly, truly the true north, we have to make manufacturing become a high tech and high pay job. If we don't do that, you will not have very competitive tomorrow. Doesn't matter which country, period.
So I think intelligent factories have really transformed the idea of working in a factory from a mundane job to something that's a lot more sexy, a lot more attractive these days. And I think what I'm hearing from you guys is ultimately it really is the vision of how artificial intelligence can augment human potential. That should always be the guiding post to help us reimagine what the future of factories could look like. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really great insights here. And of course, thank you, the audience. Thank you for staying us throughout the day. I'm sure it's been full of a packed agenda, but really appreciate your presence here and all the attention you've given us. Thank you so much.
Thank you to be the early birds for the very first morning session. My name is Tian Wei. I'm a TV host coming from CGTN. This is a joint session between the World Economic Forum and CGTN. The topic we're to discuss today is resisting autarky. As we know, tariffs, export controls, investment screenings, these have become commonly used tools by governments. Meanwhile, we are also seeing the world is getting ever more complex, as we these days always say. Wars, conflicts, plus innovation. These are bringing new possibilities, but at the same time, new challenges to many on the global supply chains and many businesses around the world. And that is why we are gathering capable minds together today to tackle the challenges, but at the very beginning, to understand exactly what is going on and what might be the solutions. As a journalist, I see it from my perspective. However, as a moderator, it is my great pleasure to see we have capable minds sitting here coming from both academic businesses to bring ideas together. And that is the charm of the World Economic Forum, as we all know. So without further ado, may I have the honor and the pleasure to introduce to all of you the panelists sitting here today. I would go with the list that was being provided by the organizer. Yue Ang, Alfred Chandler Chair Professor of Political Economy with Johns Hopkins University. And Matthew Klein, who is the founder of the Overshoot. He earlier worked as a journalist as well. Thank you. Yasushi Sasaki, Managing Director and Senior Partner with Asia Pacific Chair of Boston Consulting Group, BCG. Good to see you. Last but certainly not least, Elizabeth Thurbo, Professor of International Political Economy and Director from the University of New South Wales. Good to see all of you. May I start by asking a very general question, then we can go deeper into the discussion. So, are we seeing today just a temporary phenomenon of the so-called national security as the priority, or this is already settling down to be the theme for all of us for years to come? Professor An.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to share this panel with Tianwei and other distinguished panelists. I think I would start by pointing out the rather surreal nature of the title of this session, because I think if we imagine 10 years ago, if you had a session at the World Economic Forum with the word autarky, I think many people might react with, what is that? Because it's a word we have abandoned into the history books of planned economy. So it's quite a statement of our times that this word has been brought back. But I would caution against the idea that we can balance trade integration and autarky, that we can be dependent without being vulnerable. And to use an analogy that is actually right in front of me, I would ask everyone a question. Can you open and close the door at the same time? And some people might say, yeah, sure, you can open it halfway. But if you think about it in our regular lives, we don't open the door halfway because it's the worst of both worlds. It doesn't keep you safe, and you might just bruise yourself because you keep running into a half-open door. And if we look at the real world around us today, tariffs, export controls, investment screening.
And the list goes on.
And the list goes on. They often backfire. Tariffs have not helped to reduce trade deficits. They have increased costs. Export controls can ironically spur indigenous innovation on the other side. And so I'll be very careful about making this assumption that we are able to have it both ways.
Thank you very much. I love that analogy of the door half open. What about for you, Mr. Klein? Your thoughts on the general question, can you open the door and close the door at the same time?
No, I'm not sure. I don't think I don't think.
By the way, it will not be a test for everybody on the panel. Right.
Riddle of the session.
That's right. Can we get out of here safely without hitting
Right.
I'm not sure I would think of necessarily in this sort of linear, or binary way of opening or closing. I think to your original question, though, I think the reason that autarky, or to use a less triggering word, self-sufficiency has become more popular over the past few years is because there have been many events globally that make people feel unsafe, and that a lot of the assumptions they had about how the global economy could function well have been undermined. I think it started really most acutely with the pandemic, when a lot of things people took for granted, their ability to access material goods, they couldn't get them because transportation was, factories were shut down, or transportation was not available, or there were limited shortages of things people needed. And then there was Russia invading Ukraine and other things of this nature that suddenly make people much more aware. And so it's the question of, if you are feeling unsafe, it's a price to pay. You could call it closing a door halfway or what have you, but it's I think it is a reasonable response to get what I would think of as buying insurance. It never feels good to be paying for insurance when you don't actually need it. But if it comes a time when you do actually need that kind of, you suddenly need to make a claim, and you have that ability, that is, you're going to be glad you have it. And even not in that, if you don't even need to make a claim, if you aren't actually hurt, simply having that sense of confidence that it's there for you when you need it, I think is understandable why it's happened. I mean, I remember during the pandemic and talking with people, this is in like the spring of 2020, and at that point, one of the concerns was that farm workers, wouldn't be able to pick fruits and vegetables because they were getting sick, and where would food come from? And one of the things I learned from this is that a lot of big growers, they would have maybe 90% of their food they would grow in some places, and they'd have sort of 10% grown somewhere totally else. Yeah. And it wasn't based on the idea that their farm workers would get sick, but maybe there's some freak weather event. And I think this idea of not necessarily going from complete dependence to complete independence or autarky, what have you, but some kind of 80-20, 90-10. I suspect that probably will be something we see for a long time in response.
Very interesting, that pendulum shift. But will that be the eventual result, Mr. Sasaki?
Yes, thank you very much for having me, first of all. It's a fascinating topic. My answer to your question is, I think that, nothing is permanent and nothing is temporary.
Very philosophical.
Yes, it is. As a consultant, I have visited more than 15 countries, and I met more than 100 CEOs, I think, bilateral meeting, and then particularly in this region. And then my sense is, I think that everyone understands that nothing is predictable. That is a really common sense among the business leaders. I think this uncertainty remains for the time being. But at the same time, I feel that strong sense of the entrepreneurship. Even that everything is unpredictable, they need to survive, and they need to be entrepreneur. And they need to redesign that and what they are doing, I think, in a smart way. So that is a reality on the business front. And how do we deal with it? I think that's from here. But I can go deeper, but let me pause here that, to answer your question, that nothing is predictable. That is where we are today. Yeah.
I love that philosophical answer. Of course, you need to provide the details of it later.
Yes.
I'd love to hear more. And Professor Thurbang, your thoughts on that? Is it more philosophical we need to get? Or actually people are really having practical answers to the big question we posed at the very beginning?
Yes, and let me echo my thanks for being here. What a fantastic group of discussants. And to speak to the original question, will security continue to dominate our economic policy making, and will we continue to see this, kind of bizarre emergence of a quest for autarky in some arenas? I think it's true, obviously. Geostrategic security is the overarching lens through which so many countries are viewing their economic engagement at the moment, and that is having a quite negative impact, obviously, quite detrimental impact. But geostrategic security, or military security is just one dimension of security. There are many other dimensions of security that urgently require our attention, and I hope that we will focus on these dimensions of security going forward. Energy security is obviously important, but also social security, creating good jobs, which is also really important in terms of avoiding political polarization. Environmental security. It's crucial that we have a huge focus on environmental security. This geostrategic conflict is taking place in the context of the existential challenge of climate change. So the question really isn't, will security diminish, but will we find a way to think about balancing and perhaps reconciling these competing dimensions of national security? I think at the moment there has been a tendency to view these in terms of trade-offs. You can't have energy security and economic competitiveness, or you can't have economic competitiveness and job creation. And so there's been this focus on kind of managing trade-offs. But actually the real governance challenge, I think, across the globe is how do you actually govern in a way that advances economic, environmental, energy, social, and geostrategic security simultaneously. I think that's the challenge for governments. It's not an easy challenge, but that's where we could productively focus our attention.
That's a great point. It's not just black and white, it's rather how you manage it comprehensively. Can business community communicate with the policymakers, have good results at this moment? Are they depending on that to have solutions?
Dependent is not the right word, but they fully understand the collaboration, cooperation with the nation-state government is becoming more and more critical. I think that's a mandate. Going back to my discussion with the CEOs, two topics. One is the geopolitics, but the other is AI. Today AI may not be the key theme for this session, but I think these are the two topics always. And then it's
too early to say that, my friend. A bit later, we're going to tackle that.
Okay. Thank you. But going back to that on the topic of the geopolitics, geoeconomics, I think one key example is supply chain. Thinking about that, key critical inputs like semiconductors, raw materials, and others. I think they all need to think about that, how much they can be efficient in the past. Concentration has been that one key dogma for the business leaders, but today they need to diversify. But to some extent, diversification, I think that it depends on the context, it depends on the situation. So they need to be adaptive, they need to be flexible. That's also the reality. They can't determine that this should be the right degree of the soap. So that's a reality, and then they are thinking. And then in that context, cooperation with the government is really, really critical because they need to shape the agenda, not only for their own company, but also for the industry and but for the state.
A few adjectives: flexible, they need to be adaptive.
Yes.
That costs like billions of dollars.
Yes.
So how do you see businesses? I would love to go to other speakers a bit later, but really, how do you see businesses are coping, are adapting, are being flexible? Any good advice or good practices already that you have witnessed over the past few years?
If possible, that business leaders can think that the mid to long term basis, so that they can optimize, even if there's ups and downs of the trend. That is a key thing. But I think it depends on that and what type of the corporate governance you are running. But hopefully that will be one foundation. Then they can think not only just that single year analysis, but the multi-year analysis, how they can optimize. Even if there's ups and downs in the political stage, they can normalize in good way. And then one more thing is, no great CEOs think that stability is given. That is not given. They need to shape the agenda by themselves, more the spontaneity. I think that more actively. And that shift, I think I've clearly observed, I think that change over the last 6 years, 6 months, yeah.
Well, 6 months already is
already
a
like
very long
years,
time right now because things are changing by the day, right? Yue, your thoughts on that? Do you see businesses are really figuring out a solution of being flexible and adaptable, or actually they are facing with new questions every day?
I think I would still insist on the black and white difference, either close or open. But I think the different way of thinking is that the way you can get around that is not having some mixture of openness and closeness, but actually using non-trade tools to build resilience.
Be more specific.
If we want to look for lessons, we actually would have to look to small nations for lessons. Because for big nations, they have easy access to geoeconomic tools. They can impose tariffs, export controls, but if you think about it, the vast majority of countries in this world just cannot have access to these options. Autarky is off the table from the very start. So take Singapore, where I come from. It's a small nation, completely open. Without trade, like Singapore would not even have the most basic essential goods and services that we need, and Singapore sells to the world. So the way Singapore copes as a highly integrated small nation is not to protect markets, but to protect people. In water access, for instance, Singapore is willing to invest in extreme diversification, including even desalination, which is an expensive technology. And Singapore is not alone. Another example I can think of is Denmark. Very strong social protections, so that in the event of shocks from globalization or pandemic, the people are protected. Right. But conversely, if you look at the US, even though it has a vast and powerful arsenal of geoeconomic tools, it was not able to protect Rust Belt workers from the shocks of globalization. So maybe the conversation is the options that we have should not just be limited to geoeconomic tools, autarky, but actually thinking outside the door, if we could continue with that analogy.
And shall I say it's thinking outside the door, but also it's common sense, isn't it? It's an issue of governance and capacity, capabilities of governance, and also interactions with the other factors of the society. Elizabeth, that seems to go to your point. So if I could elaborate even more, what exactly is national security? Because we see that word so frequent. I'm a second language using English, so I did look up what is autarky, by the way, in a dictionary, because my phrases are more about globalization time. But obviously, we need to adapt, as Mr. Sasaki earlier suggested. But exactly what is national security? I understand it from the surface. But do we really understand? Are we all on the same page, Elizabeth?
Look, that's an excellent question, and could I just endorse Wen's excellent point too about autarky really being a large economy luxury, and not even a luxury actually that makes economic sense. From a small country too, like Australia, 25 million people, you know, our economic prosperity, our security, our economic security really depends, and our social security therefore, depends crucially on our integration, on our ability to export and to import the things that we need. So autarky is not even something that we could possibly entertain. But I think that this distinction of policy tools, you know, actually I should go back and say, I think too that autarky is really a very mercantilist mindset, a really zero-sum, win-lose understanding of international trade. Whereas there is a different way of thinking about trade to advance security comprehensively conceived, economic security, social security, that is a more win-win, but that doesn't come about through unfettered free markets, as we have seen, particularly in the United States. Unfettered free markets tends to deliver poor social outcomes, poor environmental outcomes, poor economic outcomes in many circumstances. This is about pursuing security by using behind-the-border mechanisms to build our techno-industrial capability and to enhance our ability to engage in trade productively. Let me give an example from Australia. At the moment, we are one of the world's largest fossil fuel exporters. We export our coal and our gas largely to East Asia to fuel manufacturing industries. But of course, environmentally, this is not a sustainable future for us. And economically, it's not sustainable because Northeast Asia is, of course, decarbonising rapidly, led by China. So the question is, how do we adjust our economy? How do we adjust our existing economic model to shift from that fossil fuel base to a renewable system that will support future economic, environmental and social security? And the task there is to use the ability of the government to crowd in private investment to start exporting, say, for example, not regular iron to feed steelmaking, but green iron, all in ways that are compliant with our WTO obligations, but then also to work with our Northeast Asian trading partners to build and grow markets for green commodities, collaborating on green standards, collaborating on the trade of environmental attributes. This is a kind of open economy economic nationalism, a positive outward-looking economic nationalism, which is where the future lies.
How do you see, Matthew, the word national security? It's been flowing interpretations over the past few months, to say. What about right now? How do you see its definition?
National security is one of those words that mean many different things depending on who you ask. I remember about 20 years ago, there was a debate about, I think it was the yogurt maker Danone in France, and it was the merger was blocked on national security grounds by the French government for making yogurt. So what counts as national security? There's a long history of that being abused in different ways. I think when we talk about the question of autarky, I believe the only government that is currently extant that has endorsed autarky in any way is North Korea. As far as I know, which in the sense of literally trying to not be, even then not successfully. By the way,
that's one of those rare examples.
Right.
But can we focus more on the overall economies that we are talking about here today?
I think it's also obviously, if we can be confident that the relationships, the transactions that we're accustomed to, the investments you've made abroad are going to be there, and those flows will be persistent over different states of the world, it doesn't make sense to do things to alter them, because if businesses, profit-seeking businesses look for the best places to invest and develop those relationships, that's why they exist. Anything you deviate from that should, in principle, make you poor overall. The problem is people don't have the confidence that those investments will necessarily be honored, that those transactions will necessarily be possible, that those trade flows will be sustainable for whatever reason. And if you aren't confident that you can continue to import certain things that you need, then the question becomes, how do you protect against the possibility that you might not be able to? And this is certainly a lot.
And how many possibilities are there?
Well, that's the problem. Right, so you could imagine a world where you sort of go to the extreme and say you have to be able to make everything at home. But that is obviously extraordinarily expensive and inefficient.
Right.
And so nobody wants to do that. And then people say, well, we should prioritize. And then you look at what the list of people things they say, and then this has certainly been a live conversation in the U.S. and in Europe and elsewhere, and certainly in China, this is certainly a big policy. Japan, but people can say, oh, well, you need to have chips. Okay, you need to have certain kind of magnets or metals or fossil fuels. Australia exports a lot of raw fossil fuels, but no refining capacity for those. So it was actually a huge problem of not having access to gasoline or jet fuel and having to, do a lot of emergency deals with Japan and Korea to be able to get, even though a large net exporter in those. So, being able to access those things. But then you could say, for example, in the United States, I believe 100% of car seats in the United States are made in China. Now, that seems fine.
Well, we probably need to do a survey about that to know the exact number.
I think it's an extraordinarily high number, car seats and strollers.
Yeah.
And now, right, it's not a problem, right? It's not like there's a mass constituency of people in the United States saying we want to make car seats for ourselves. There's not people saying that we're not going to have access to Chinese car seats. But obviously, if you're just if you're mechanically saying, well, where are your dependencies, where do things come from, 100% from one country or whatever, you could imagine a situation like, well, that seems, the same list that people say, like a rare earth magnet, if dysprosium is a national security concern, like why not a car seat? I'm not saying that either one necessarily is, right? But this is what makes this kind of analysis very challenging. That's why you have lots of arguments on what constitutes national security. You could say nothing. You could say many, many, many things. And the problem is a lot of things you think of as being, it turns out being necessary, people didn't think about. Like people never thought about face masks as being as something you needed to be able to get in size until 2020, for the most part. And then suddenly everyone realized we would need to be able to do that.
Very
so
interesting.
That's a challenge.
You give several examples, for example, about the pandemic. I would love to share with everybody a Chinese traditional saying. By the way, we have traditional saying about many things. There's one called, once you're bitten by a snake, you're afraid of the rope for 10 years. But we hope we can graduate from that 10 years as soon as possible, right? Having said that, though, well, you are talking about the possibilities of national security going everywhere. Mr. Sasaki was kind of calmly looking at you, but I really wonder what is going on in his mind because businesses.
I tried to be snake.
Right? Because business leaders have been telling us over the past few years. So difficult it is. They have to adjust every time when the policies are changing to so many different economies. So, Mr. Sasaki, I give you a floor to talk about it.
No. Thank you. I love your analogy of saying the outside door concept, but that leads to the question, how do we define the role of the government? And then my understanding, nothing has changed the responsibility of the government, I think, at least, over the years. I think government is responsible for the social welfare, I think infrastructure. I think that hasn't changed. Large state, small state, that hasn't changed at all. But what has changed over the last 6 months is because of the export control, because of the energy crisis. It's beyond that. How do we set that, the role of a government beyond that, the traditional scope? I think that is a way I interpret. And then that is based on the discussion with the business leaders. And then they start thinking that, okay, this is really, really attacking my own business. And then I need to collaborate with the government. Otherwise, I can't survive. That's a true voice I heard. So fundamentally, they trust that their own government. That's why they are making that, their business in each state. But I think the situation has changed a lot. And then how much I can step further to strengthen my position in collaboration with the government, I think that will be the key thing I have in my mind. Yeah.
Businesses are getting ever more practical.
Yeah.
And knowing to a certain extent the limits of governments, their capabilities of handling the situation. And sometimes businesses probably, with their operations worldwide, have a better understanding of what exactly is going on and better understanding of the tools that they have, for example, AI. By the way, I'm going to talk about that later. Okay, so go to you, Elizabeth, on that too.
Yes, this is a really interesting observation about the role of the government and it not having changed. From sitting from an Australian perspective, I think this is really the key question that we are asking ourselves, because for a very long time, it's been understood in my country that the role of the government is simply to provide an adequate framework of rules in which the free market can operate. And it's not the business of the government to get involved in thinking about the industrial structure of the nation. It doesn't matter if we produce potato chips or computer chips. We'll let the market sort out and domestic industrial structure doesn't matter. But I think, to your point, COVID, along with all sorts of other disruptions, climate change, the energy crisis, have taught us that actually industrial structure matters. What our economies look like on the inside matters. Domestic capability matters. So this forces, especially in the West, because, of course, in East Asia, the understanding of the purpose of the government has always been much more expansive. But in the West, we've had a very, very narrow view of what it's appropriate for the government to do. So meeting this challenge, this comprehensive national security challenge, now requires a fundamental rethinking of the role of the government. In its core, this national security challenge is a challenge of mindset, a shift in understanding of what governments can and should do. Of course, not displacing markets, but acting strategically behind the border, not at the border, to build those capabilities in ways that allow us to still benefit from the enormous security-enhancing opportunities of international trade and investment, but without undermining our domestic capabilities.
There are two parts to this statement that you just make, which I think very interesting. On the one hand, the governments are exercising, their learning curve, so to speak, around the world, and we should give them time. It's only sensible that we're giving them time, just like everything else. But on the other hand, how much time should we give them? And how much will policies, change the overall landscape that we are talking about here today? How much businesses have to lose in order to let the governments, so to speak, or the policymakers become more matured or more capable? And meanwhile, how much does it take to see the overall picture, as the picture is always evolving? These are wonderful questions coming out of the important opinions that you just shared. I would like to go to you, Yue, on that too, your thoughts on that, because these are two scholars, so they can talk with free spirit. So I would love to come to you on that as well.
Okay.
Yue. So go ahead.
All right, in free spirit, I'll echo everyone's insights. But Tianwei, I think you have actually underscored the key word for us, which is time. So unpredictability is going to be an enduring feature of the world, both for governments and companies alike. But
the question is, should we just let it be, or should we do something, right?
Yes, they will absolutely have to do something, right? But the key for governments and companies to do the right thing has a lot to do with their time horizon, whether they think short term or long term. And one of the key challenges of our times is that increasingly our time horizon is getting short, both for governments and even for companies, because companies are under constant pressure to deliver quarterly, right? So within a company, do you do just in time or do you do just in case? If you do just in case, it doesn't contribute to your profit, but Mr. Sasaki will be the expert on that. So that's my impression, but which is to say that if you invest a lot of effort in resilience, in insurance, your shareholders, your stakeholders will ask, what's the payoff? Show me the evidence. So the key here is really time horizon. And it is the same for governments as well. In order for governments to adapt to unpredictability, they need to have the patience to plan for the long term, so that even if short-term actions seem to be costly, they will pay off in the long term. So China's investment in clean energy is one example. In the beginning, it was expensive, wasn't clear it was going to pay off. But when the Iran conflict broke out, China had a much more diversified energy base than if it had never started on the clean energy revolution. Right? So you need to have this long time horizon in order to cope with unpredictability, so that you're not excessively distracted by the daily noise up and down, but you have your sights on the pattern in the long term, and really build your policies in a cumulative way toward that direction.
Matthew.
So I would say the part of this is a sort of a return to tradition, I think, that actually historically governments were very focused on sort of the composition of economic activity and providing for the ability to produce things domestically. And I think it goes back to this sense, and I don't want to be too depressing here, but essentially that was for states existed to wage war, and waging war meant the ability to make things you needed to fight wars. And so that was a preoccupation of governments going back hundreds of years at least. And so in a certain sense, fading away from that and being sort of focused on setting the rules for the game, and as you were saying, I think is sort of a modern sort of luxury benefit of having been in a period of relative peace. And so if you are concerned about reversion of that, it's not unfortunately surprising to get back. So I think in that sense, it's something it's not completely novel so much as going back to the past. And I think government's also sort of learning from each other and saying what worked, and if say, oh, well, isn't it nice that they had stockpiles of this, or they had this, or what have you. I think that's part of it. I think the challenge in saying we want to give governments time to learn, or not, is that you don't know when a mistake is being made. Saying we don't want a long.
Sometimes you really know where the mistakes
well,
are.
Even then, though, I mean, I think it's completely right to say that things that are beneficial long term sometimes are not beneficial in the short term. They may cost long. The problem is things that are costly long term are also costing the short term sometimes. So distinguishing between that can be quite tricky. And that I think is going to. I mean, that's not a new problem, obviously, but I think you just have to have people keep iterating. I think hopefully figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with many of those points. I mean, to come back to this Australia example and, our efforts now to shift away from just exporting iron ore to exporting green iron, we're going through this policy learning in real time. We haven't tried to do strategic industrial policy since the 1980s, and that wasn't very successful at that point, and it delegitimized the whole enterprise. Obviously, a few years ago when we started experimenting with this new approach, we really tried to import policy tools from overseas, like production tax incentives, really mirroring what was done with the European New Deal or, the Inflation Reduction Act in America, because we didn't have this industrial policy muscle. We weren't sure of what to do. Those policies haven't worked. And in the recent government budget, a lot of those policies have been done away with. But importantly, what the government hasn't done away with is the goal. So we're now keeping the goal, but experimenting with a new suite of much more domestically attuned, task-appropriate policies focused on both domestic capability building, but also market creation with Japan, with Korea, with China, about standard setting, about collective demand creation, about mandates. So I think it's this kind of learning that is really important, but it speaks to this problem of will governments get the opportunity? Will early failure delegitimize and open the way for those who wouldn't like the goal of the green energy transition to happen to kind of politicize that and argue for a reversion to the fossil fuel order of the past? So I think this question of how much scope governments will have and this time question is so important.
Mr. Sasaki, from the business perspective, how do you see, on the one hand, using national security, if we still use that word, as a decoration for failures of policies? On the other hand, the legitimate need for national security to a certain extent? Certainly, you're welcome to use examples of the businesses that you're experiencing around the world.
Just touch on that, the time horizon issue,
Yes.
and then come back to that, your part. So, yeah, I mean, it's good to say that, from the just in time to the just in case. I think that I love that phrase. But my sense, even in the just in case, there should be a way the companies can make that excess margin. I mean, it's not just the cost. And then there should be, because I'm a strong believer of the entrepreneurship of the business community. They will do, I think, even under the stressful situation, they will find a way to, I think, to get that excess margin. That's a business. That's a spirits, animal spirits. And then, of course, I mean, I'm in the camp that I think quarterly basis earning call that too much. I think I agree. But the 1 year is good or 2 years is good. I have no answer.
Yeah.
So optimal point, business leader through that negotiation, I think they'll find a way of the solution. That's where I'm not academics. I have no statistics, but I'm the strong believer of that side.
Yeah.
Then, in order to enhance that condition, that foundation, how much government can cooperate? I think that is a settling point that the relationship between the private sector and government side. Too much of the intervention may damage that the animal spirits, but just a laissez-faire may not be enough. I think that's quite clear. So then I think that discussion, the healthy dialogue between government, public sector, and the private sector, ongoing dialogue, would be critical. I think that in this age. That is my answer.
It sounds like common sense, but to do it is not an easy job, isn't it? As we know these days. But what about conversations among governments as well? We used to believe that the governments always talk to one another. That's their job, right? But what about now? It seems that dialogues and mechanisms of dialogues and discussions about policies or even just about common sense have been challenged over the past few years. Are you seeing a repairing back process, or are we still in the very middle of it?
I think it's fair to say, as Klein reminded us, that in a sense we were all traumatized by the pandemic. The pandemic exposed the fragilities of the global system that we took for granted or didn't want to recognize. And I think it's fair to say that all of the governments around the world are still trying to recover, from that very difficult, experience with, like you said, the analogy of the snake, the feelings of suspicion and mistrust. It was also an environment that was very zero-sum. But we all want mass, and if you get it, I don't get it. So I think we still have shadows of that history, which, if you think about it, it's only 5 or 6 years ago.
But at the same time, we shouldn't always blame the government, because sometimes you see businesses go to governments and say, oh, this is something they did. We shouldn't let them do that. And therefore, they're asking favorable policies within their own national borders. And that is also a common practice. Let's just be realistic. So, Mr. Sasaki, what exactly should be the role of businesses as we see things are evolving? Very briefly from you, then we go to the next question.
I think that's as I said, how to grasp the future, I think should be in the hands of the leaders and CEOs. Leaders are quite responsible, I think, in this age, because everything is unpredictable. And how to collaborate with the government, how to collaborate with other business leaders, I think that dialogue, of course, they are doing that brutal competition in the day-to-day business. But at the same time, think about that, just a mid to long-term basis. How to find the right optimization, I think that will be the role,
As we speak, we were talking about this in the green room. There is one supply chain expo going on in Beijing as we speak right here. Thousands of companies are participating from all over the world, including in some of the so-called sensitive areas of industry, chips, and the list goes on. And they are talking to one another.
That's exactly the animal spirits. I think that they try to optimize themselves, and then but that will create that the unity, and then I think to maximize the total benefit. That's a way. But I think, as I said, just a complete laissez-faire, that may not be the case, but the right coordination across the business leaders with the public sector, I think that will be the key solution in this age.
And of course, the public participation.
Public participation is quite...
They want both the security and good life at the same time.
I'm not concerned about that cooperation between private and government, because they are rational to some extent. But I do worry about the cooperation across the government, to be honest. But that's not my field, so...
I'm glad you speak your mind. Having said that, though, we promise everybody that
还有一个关于 AI 的专题讨论。但是呢，面对这样的巨大的覆盖各个国家、各个行业，涉及到社会安全和国家安全的技术颠覆的时候，我们如何尽可能的充分利用新的创新和技术，让我们能够去逆转或者是抵御闭关锁国的趋势呢？好，先请 Elizabeth 来谈一下，再请其他同事补充。问得很好，确实，AI 无处不在。在美国呢，也在讨论AI 相关的出口是否需要进行更加密切的审查，同时也要考虑到其他国家对 AI 能力的需求，这是一个非常根本性的问题。而且它也会涉及到。
Especially for productivity, especially in the context of aging societies, it will be incredibly important. Huge concerns, obviously, about job displacement. So an incredibly complex governance challenge. And then there are the environmental considerations that layered over the top with AI in terms of the enormous power required for it and also the water access around it. And that brings in the questions of social license as well. I was just reading in the newspaper this morning in Australia a proposed data centre in a kind of a heritage listed site and enormous concerns about the implications there. Socially. So the question of how we govern this is really vital. National capabilities will very much matter. From my perspective, being concerned with energy transition governance, I think that we should move towards AI being born green. All new AI capacity being fueled with renewable energy would be an excellent first step, because we can't just think about the military security and the economic security. We have to think about the environmental security as well.
Right.
So I live in San Francisco, where AI that's certainly been a live topic. And it's interesting because on the one hand, there is this sort of national element of it where, Europeans particularly feel like they don't have AI. There's the sort of the Chinese AI models and the US AI models, but the actual people who work in AI are all over the world. It's very international in that sense. The supply chains for the data centers are extremely international. So even if many of the data centers are being built, I think, disproportionately in the US, although not only in the US, the parts come from Korea and Taiwan and Japan and all sorts of other places as well. Sometimes exclusively, right? I mean, I think the DRAM overwhelmingly comes from Samsung and SK Hynix almost alone. So that's an interesting element of, on the one hand, extreme levels of dependence on one producer. The power sources, right? To the extent that much of the energy is not coming from renewables, it is also globally traded. So, I mean, there's some coal, like this is local, but a lot of it is gas or oil or other things. And so the mix of, and then the software, in theory, anyone could use the software, but in practice, as we've seen, there are limits on, who can be allowed to or is willing to use software from different places. And so the locations of where the companies are that actually write the software, where the data centers are, where the parts of these things, it becomes very complex very quickly. And so, it's definitely not conducive to an autarky system. There is no society that can produce all the things at once simultaneously and has yet. But you see a lot of different fractures across the software, across the supply chain, across the energy, and that makes it and across the people, that makes it challenging.
It's very interesting. You mentioned the many factors related to AI these days, whether it is raw materials, the supply chains, and talent. And you see they are being artificially separated in a way. This is really a unique phenomenon over the past few decades, shall we say. But as the talents are so much from everywhere in the world, we also see that in China, see it in the US, see it in Japan, Korea, and South Korea, and many other places. But the question is, how could policies say only people from this country can use this, people from that country cannot use this? It's becoming such a, very unique phenomenon, shall we say, just of our time. Having said that, though, Mr. Sasaki, about businesses, there has been different approaches. One is so-called reaching for the star, the AGI and everything, and the other is AI Plus, which we see in China and elsewhere in Asia. How do you see these different approaches, in a way, could help us to tackle the ultimate question we asked at the very beginning, resisting autarky?
Let me frame this way. So the application, LLM, the competition is going on. And then the next is data layer. I think that is also linked to that national interest. And then here in China, I think that, developed a very unique, strong ecosystem. It's quite strong. But is it really the matter of the global coordination? That is a really open discussion. I think that I'm not naive enough to say that the data layer part is strongly linked to that, the national interest. So I think that kind of competition will continue. But I'm really more concerned about that, the code of the responsible AI. That has been a topic of the web for long now. It's beyond that, national interest. It's AI. It might be the threat to us human beings. And how do we coordinate that level? I think that is more the concern to me. And then above that, I think that we will do. As I said, I'm a strong believer of the animal spirit, so I think we may coordinate in the right way. But the responsible AI part, I think unless we have some good forum, it might be quite scary. That's my honest view.
Very important point. We see the two presidents of China and United States met earlier this year, and they have agreed among many of the talking points. I look at every one of them very carefully. One is track one dialogue on AI governance. Of course, we are yet to see what is the outcome in the public, but how important it is that the AI powers are talking to one another on governance issues, at least on coordination of governance issues. And what would that mean to help us resist the autarky?
Many AI conversations today, it's popular to apply a almost Cold War mindset, like this is a Sputnik race, and the competition is who is going to have the most advanced, powerful models. The new release, is the fastest and the strongest. It's a Cold War mindset that it's similar to an autarky kind of mindset. But a different way to understand AI is that there's a very different layer of competition, if you could say that, but it's also very collaborative, which is, it's more important to take the existing knowledge of AI concentrated in the US and China and think about how can you integrate it into society, integrate it into business operations, into higher education, into even elderly care, healthcare, and all aspects of life. That is the integration and application layer that I think has not gotten enough attention, and where it's not a competition in the sense that if China integrates AI well, that doesn't mean the US cannot do it. In fact, the US can then learn from China and vice versa as well. So maybe we need to move away from this Cold War mindset. Someone is going to reach the moon first, and realize that the technology is powerful and existing, but there is so much room for thinking creatively about how we can use this technology well for all aspects of social life.
Is Yue too idealistic?
Idealistic,
I think so. That's a very much important question. But at the same time, no need to refrain that competition. Competition is necessary, and then that will create that new value. Yeah. But the fundamental coordination will be necessary, particularly for the AI, because that's such a very important technology we are facing today.
Related to the competition, I was doing some interviews, of course, over the past few years on AI, and some industry experts have been talking to me, and I would love to quote him right now. He said, there should be more great competition between businesses, among businesses, but there should not be competition among governments for having more regulations than one another, especially toward one another. So that's an interesting quote I got from business and also industry expert. Elizabeth, your thoughts on that?
Yes. Well, look, I think that competition between governments in some respects isn't necessarily a bad thing. If we look at the countries, for example, that have delivered some of the most incredible transformative economic development experiences. So, at the end of World War II, Japan, Korea, these governments were in large part driven by an incredible desire to catch up with the West. That is an inherently competitive drive, and it was an enormously productive drive, and it wasn't seen through a zero-sum lens. And I think, coming back to this open door, closed door analogy, this was a way, a kind of positive, if we look to Japan, we look to Korea, a kind of positive economic nationalism, whereby these governments were very much focused on the question of how to transform the industrial structure of the nation and how to lift millions of people out of poverty in a very quick time. And that was done through a kind of managed openness in a way. So it was about about acknowledging that there are enormous gains to be made through trade. Exporting is hugely important.
Right.
And if you want to export, you have to maintain an open market as well. There are enormous gains to be made from foreign investment. There are enormous gains to be made from technology transfer. But the question is how you put the guardrails in place to ensure that that doesn't spill over into negative domestic, social and economic consequences.
Matthew, and then you.
I think the challenge with AI is that a lot of the people who work in AI are convinced that it is the next nuclear weapon and has the high risk of annihilating humanity. And so that automatically complicates the conversations among governments and how they think about it, because if it is in fact a benign kind of new form of software that improves productivity at the margin, and that's great, obviously there's no need to feel like it's a Cold War dynamic or competitive or anything of that nature. But if the people in the industry themselves, rightly or wrongly, I have no view, but enough of them seem to think that this is extremely potentially destructive, that obviously is going to color the conversation. And I think also, unfortunately, regardless of whether governments can cooperate in the regulation, I don't even think any individual government has shown its ability to come up with a convincing framework of how to regulate AI in a way that is, mitigates the risks in a way and maximize the benefits, much less how they coordinate their own development. So I think that creates potentially a very significant challenge.
The thoughts of autarky has created a fragmentation of the supply chains all over the world we have seen, but this time also fall on the issue of artificial intelligence. And yet, the further it is down that road, we are seeing more danger of autarky. This is like a vicious cycle that we are talking about. So what is the best ingredient right now, knowing the danger of autarky, and therefore taking advantage of the tools of AI to put at least a pause? Earlier we talked about the governments to government discussion, even among the two biggest powers, but the other economies too. We've been seeing economies hedging between the two economic power, China and United States, as a approach. So what might be the most pragmatic way and the forward-looking way? Yue, I would love to hear your thoughts on that before we wrap it up for everybody.
Sure. I think I'll come back to my original point, which is that geoeconomic tools is really a big power luxury. Only very few countries can deploy these kinds of tools. And so the relevant policy for the rest of the world is how do you build internal resilience? Internal absorptive capacity to deal with the shocks of being integrated. So I'll just rest the point here, so that we're not fixated on autarky. Yes,
that's a great point. Final words from you, also, Matthew.
I think the appeal of self-sufficiency or insurance or autarky would go down if people felt safer, and to the extent that governments and societies can do things to reduce the risks that make people want to have that self-insurance, that would be better for everyone.
Elizabeth.
I think the biggest takeaway for me would be that while we're very much focused at the moment on geostrategic security concerns, and this is driving this autarkic turn, if you like, that national security is much broader. It's not just about military security, it's about economic and energy and environmental and social security. And across this comprehensive security dimension, you cannot maximize those with a closed economy. The existential challenge is climate change. That cannot be addressed by any country acting alone. So it's a prosperity, comprehensive prosperity is about productive collaboration.
Yeah, that's
Well, healthy discussion with the multi layers, government, private sectors, I think that would be the starting point. That's why we are here. I really could refresh my own thinking by having this discussion. But that is a starting point. Unless we have the right understanding with others, we'll never be able to reach that, the cooperation consensus. Yeah.
One thing I have learned from all our capable panelists today is not to reach conclusion too soon. There are a lot of efforts that need to be made in order to make things better, arguably, for everyone. I want to thank all of you for your contribution and your insights. Really appreciate it. This has been a joint production of World Economic Forum and CGT and MTNWay. Thank you for being with me and our panelists. World Economic Forum and CGT and MTNWay. Thank you for being with me and our panelists.
meeting of the new champions. It starts today to set the scene for a week of discussions where we would like to hear more from our co-chairs. And we have a hashtag for this meeting, which is hashtag AMNC26. So I'm gonna start with you, Mirek. We are meeting here under the theme Innovating at Scale, which will be the golden thread throughout the meeting. It's an ambitious statement, and it is very relevant in the given the geoeconomic landscape at the moment. What inspired you to come up with this theme for our meeting in Dalian?
Thank you, Jan. So as you said, first, we're building on a long-standing tradition in China as the World Economic Forum. This is our 17th meeting. We're very happy to be back in Dalian for this meeting. We also, as an organization, are very happy that we have 20 years of having presence with the office here in Beijing. So a number of milestones for the World Economic Forum and China. As you mentioned, we will have over 1,700 leaders here gathered from around the world, from over 90 countries, with political leaders. Of course, we're also very happy that we have the Chinese premier with us and a number of other high-level decision makers from within China, but we have also heads of state and government from around the world. It's actually one of the strongest participations that we've had here in recent history for the annual meeting of the new champions. You mentioned the theme. It is reflective of what we believe is an important imperative for economic decision makers and CEOs and chairs around the world. We are living through an age of exponential innovation, through an age of rapid technological advancement. We have a number of technologies at our disposal that can really change industry, economy, and society for the better. What we want to communicate with this theme is the urgency to really deploy these solutions at scale to benefit as many people, as many economies and societies as possible. And there could be a few dimensions to it. One is, if you look at it from just pure industrial lens, it is about how do you really, where the rubber hits the road, and if you take AI, how are we actually deploying it across different sectors? It can be different in different sectors, but there is an overwhelming imperative to really be laser focused on where not only this brings efficiency, but more importantly, where you can create new value for your business within a specific industry with some of these technologies. There is also a policy perspective to it where the enabling environment, not only regulation, but overall the enabling and policy environment is extremely important in terms of how this actually affects the economy, but also society. And this intersection of policy and technology at a time when we really are going through an era where we haven't seen this exponential nature before. And so how can policy actually keep up? And at the core of this is really that you need to be able to iterate with your peers. You need to have access to partners, both in academia as well as industry and society. And so this knowledge-driven iteration around how to respond, how to shape these technologies for positive outcomes in society is also a big part of the discussions here. The final element is around society. So if you take a societal lens, again, if we, for example, just look at AI, we are now reaching a phase where we are thinking and we are looking at, of course, more and more data around what this means for work, what this means for society overall. And here we'll be taking a global perspective, looking at, of course, how to make sure that there is agency around how this technology is deployed in companies and in industry, but also looking at, for example, how different markets are actually interacting with some of these technologies. And so we, for example, see that in certain markets, the way the adoption rate is being developed, and the attitudes towards some of these technologies, where it is also perceived as an opportunity to leapfrog and have access to more healthcare, more education, are some of the factors that we will be looking at here.
Thank you very much, Merrick. Marjorie, first of all, thank you for contributing as a co-chair for this meeting. There will be talks about regional trade. Do you think it can be a springboard for growth?
Well, I like to think, as I look around the world and see how complicated it gets, of what we've observed and what our clients have observed, is that we seem to have gone from having these multinational corporations into what we call multi-local corporations. It's not that the companies change, but I think their needs and the environment certainly has changed. And so what that means is that as they look around a very disrupted world between the tariffs and supply chain disruptions and the geopolitical situation, they've had to find a way to operate on a more of a market-by-market basis. So I think as companies have, and this has been actually aided or encouraged, I guess you'd say, by some of the geopolitical tensions, because people have had to find new markets for things, whether it's because they've been cut off on the supply chain or whether tariffs have changed the way they operate. And so I think what you find now is that there's a lot more market-by-market assessment of the differences and how to operate. And I was looking up the statistics, and for China alone, about 57.8% of their trade was regional and was done through 15 different bilateral agreements. And that kind of differentiation causes the companies to have to operate a little differently market by market. So I do think for the companies that get their head around this and are able to anticipate some of these changes, that it could be a springboard for additional trade. But I think that it's a path from here to there, because most CEOs didn't learn all of this in business school. This is a very different world in which they have to operate. And so the ability to navigate that and to find out who the right stakeholders are and how to engage on a market-by-market basis is really going to be the difference between success and lack of success for some of the companies. And Merrick, you know, this is why I think also having a meeting like this is so important, because you talked about AI, and I think AI brings a lot to the table in terms of those differentiations. But AI isn't human, and these kind of relationships and building of trust and understanding more about each other's markets is what is going to cause that springboard. So they can have the information from the AI, but I really do think that, it's my hope this week too that we're able to do that.
Thank you. Samalia Subaru, you represent a finance institution and you invest in localized ecosystems. What do you think is the direction of travel for around entrepreneurship and the contribution to the different economies?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And I think that we need to move from celebrating entrepreneurs to looking at systems that produce entrepreneurs, particularly for us in Africa. So entrepreneurs create businesses and ecosystems create industries. So the focus must be, how do we create the ecosystems that allow entrepreneurs to scale? This is a particularly important question because by 2050, we're going to have 2.5 billion people in Africa. So 1 of every 4 people in the world will be African. That is a significant responsibility, not just for Africa, but for the rest of the world. So we have to be thinking about how to move the current systems from really one of, I would say, value extraction to one of more value capture and one value retention. How do we build the infrastructure stock that allows for industry to thrive? Our work over the past years have shown us that we have like two kinds of entrepreneurs in the main. We have the industrial entrepreneurs, some of whom are doing very amazing things. So for example, we're financing the construction of the world's largest refinery in Nigeria as we speak. They started with 650,000 tons. It's operating at 700,000, and they're scaling that to 1.4 million barrels per day. We're also supporting the creation of the largest fertilizer platform, scaling from 3 million tons to 12 million tons in both Nigeria and Ethiopia. We're supporting the construction of the largest green copper smelter so far in DRC. Then we're also looking at ecosystems for entrepreneurs in technology and AI and digital. We're supporting the creation of the digital free zone in Nigeria called Itana. And we have learned from our prior experience. We built the fiber optic cable that brought from Portugal into Africa that helped really transform banking systems in West Africa. But we missed the innovation of the entrepreneurs, and that's where most of the value was created. So we've learned from that and are now focused on supporting innovation and entrepreneurship within Africa. So I think the real lesson is we must be focused on ecosystems. We must focus on systems that have both energy, transport and logistics, and more importantly, create jobs going forward. We've learned that it's important to ensure that there is significant policy coordination. There's significant, I would say, alignment of both resource and infrastructure. Otherwise, the resource doesn't lead to competitiveness. And we need to focus on more competitiveness and more, I would say, integrated systems going forward.
Thank you very much. We have now time for a few questions from the media. So if you have a question, you can make a sign and then introduce, please, yourself, ask your question. Here.
Thank you, directors. I'm Bing Li from Dalian International Communication Center, and I have a question. It's a normal one. In your opinion, what makes the year's Summer Davos hosted in Dalian most distinctive?
You said most?
Yeah, most. In your opinion, what makes this year's Summer Davos hosted in Dalian most distinctive?
Distinctive. Yeah. Okay, distinctive. Sorry. Mary, you wanna start on this? Thank you for your question.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for your question. If I look at our tradition of bringing innovators to this meeting, which has always been the backbone of this meeting, if I look at the composition of the innovators, you see that there is a leaning toward, for example, embedded physical AI, robotics. We have here 15 unicorns, for example, from China. 7 of them are related to robotics and physical AI. As we all know, there is a lot of developments globally around how these automated systems are deployed in industry, but also then in the economy. And so this is quite a distinctive feature, and I think it's reflective of not only what's happening in China, but also then where kind of AI is going as well. The second interesting feature is there is quite a lot of companies, both among the unicorns and other innovators in kind of life sciences, pharma, biomanufacturing. I think if I were to pick one, biomanufacturing would be a very interesting area where you see synthetic biology kind of meeting fermentation and other processes, and it's really becoming a very important focus. A lot of the innovators that are here. So obviously, we have a very holistic agenda, but you can always see that there are certain things that are maybe coming up a little stronger. And this year, those would be the two things that have caught my eye.
Thank you very much. Hope you enjoy your stay in Dalian. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yes, here in the front. Here in the front, please.
My name is Kit Pachariano. I'm from Dubai, Asia. Yeah, I'd like to ask Subaru. Yeah, like as you mentioned about economy growth and also like the job creation in Africa, like how does AI, in the past few years, been impact in a good way and a challenging way for Africa as a whole?
Thank you. Very good question. So far, what we've seen is that AI is providing significant leapfrog opportunities in various areas. So, for example, learning is very different now. Right now, with the right access, a child in Africa has the same access to information and knowledge as a child in Boston or here in China, and that is significant. The farmer in Nigeria has the same access to a lot of information, so that is significantly improving productivity. And what we're trying to do is to see how we can embed that more across the society. We're trying to see how we can help universities adopt it, how they can use that to train more people, how to produce a lot more engineers. We're seeing how that can be useful for a lot more planning, better planning, and even for across many areas, and I'll give some examples. So we're doing a lot of exploration now in Africa, just to kind of understand the resource endowment. We've done an earlier research on Africa's strategic minerals, and it showed that there was almost $30 trillion of minerals in the ground, but a lot of countries were not represented. And we know from the artisanal mining activities in those countries that there are resources there. So with AI today, we can see a lot more depth with lower cost. So it means that developing the resources is going to be less expensive and it's going to be faster than before. We're seeing the adoption of AI significantly across many areas, and it's really improving productivity across many sectors of the economy.
Thank you. Do we have, okay, let's take one more question here, please.
My question is that, is there any specific goals you want to achieve during these 3 meetings? And I'm a reporter from Taiwan Business Weekly. And such as, do you want to bridge the capacity in AI, especially in Asia that have a tremendous AI capacity, to bring the capacity in Asia to the rest of the world?
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. Margie, do you have a specific objective?
I always have an objective when I come. I was at the first one, and the progress has been tremendous. But the reason I love coming to the Summer Davos meeting is that it's very, to me, very business focused. And it gives you a sense of the environment in which you're working. You get to talk to a lot of entrepreneurs as well as larger companies, but growth companies, about what their vision is and what their needs are. But the conversations in the hall are always about what you learn and how it stimulates the idea of working closely together. And what I've seen, especially right now in China with all the innovation, is how important it's going to be to partner in the future and to bring companies together to share resources, because there's big problems and we're all resource constrained in some ways. And so one of my goals, being here, is to learn as much as I can, but also to find that connected tissue that enables us to do a better job as people who are stewards of companies, and to share some of those experiences. And that's kind of what I hope is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think we had one last question up there. Was there one more?
Reporter from Dalian News Media Group. This year's theme is innovating at scale. And what's your consideration on that? By the way, what do you think the outcome, the practice, the current practice and outcomes of scaling innovation between China and Western countries? And also, how do you think each side should improve in terms of scaling in innovation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Merrick, would you like?
I mean, so that's a very good question, and I'll look at it from our perspectives in Africa. One of the reasons why, and I also answered the question, the last question was asked, what do we expect from this summer Davos? So for us in the main, we want to better understand the significant transformation that's happened here in China. You know, I would say that the amount of economic progress that's happened here is significant. And for us in Africa, because we know we're going to be 2.5 billion people in 24 years, we want to start the infrastructure and industrial master planning that would enable us deliver prosperity and dignity for our people, especially create jobs. So one of the things we want to get from this Davos is to learn, you know, from the experience and see what is adaptable. Because I mean, there's no replication. It's really to understand what works and what can you adapt to your system. And that is important for us because to be able to scale innovation, we have to build systems. You know, prosperity doesn't happen, it's planned. We want to understand how it was done here and see what systems we can build, you know, to scale. We're already doing a couple of things like I mentioned, but we want to understand how to have that more integrated. That is important because we have seen so many things from the work we do, and we think one of the things are missing is the systems. You know, we're trying to see how we can build those systems across the key economies on the continent.
Thank you. Mirik, you would like to add to that?
No, thank you. Just building on both of you, I think we do live in a more kind of contested or fragmented environment geoeconomically, and so at the same time we have really this exponential innovation that has the promise to change our societies for the better. So just to say that this summit, because it's an informal exchange, very practical. We're close to innovators and business leaders. So we want to play our part here in Dalian to really make sure that we close any knowledge gaps that may exist, to make sure that some of these innovations can really be deployed across developed economies, emerging markets, developing economies. It's very important that, because you could argue there is a window of opportunity around these technologies to be deployed. There is a certain urgency to be deployed and seeing the results in terms of productivity gains across societies. Because if you also don't use this window of opportunity, you could argue that you could then end up with a scenario where you have even more disconnect between societies and different economies. As we all know, we do not want to end up in a situation where some of these innovations are closed-off gardens and even more concentrated in certain economies. So really being able to have this broad-based adoption of the value that these technologies can have for all of us is some of the core fundamentals for this meeting. Also continues to be an important part of the work of the World Economic Forum.
Thank you very much, Mirik. Thank you very much to our co-chairs. Thank you to the journalists, to the media. Thank you to our online audience. You can follow the rest of the meeting on our live app. And I wish you all a successful and interesting meeting during the coming days. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone, to what is going to be your favorite session at Summer Davos, Curiosity as a Catalyst, where we explore how art and science should be more explicitly intertwined. I'm Vanessa Chan, the inaugural Vice Dean of Innovation Entrepreneurship at the University of Pennsylvania School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and more importantly, the co-founder of Rebel Potters, a pottery studio in Philadelphia, where we have 140 community members. You can see why I am so excited about this session. Some of the greatest innovators understood that art and technology are deeply connected. From the OG, Leonardo da Vinci, who saw art as a way to foster better inventions and better ideas, to Steve Jobs, who thought technology shouldn't just work seamlessly, but that design, creativity, and art were just as important as engineering. I'm thrilled to be joined today by 3 innovators who live and breathe the exact same ethos. They are part of the Science Gallery Network, an international ecosystem of university-linked galleries dedicated to colliding science and art to ignite creativity. With that, I'd love to welcome Ryan Jeffries, the Director for Melbourne, Australia, Miguel Gonzalez-Virgin, Director for both Monterrey, Mexico and Ireland, and Janvi Palki, the Director for Bangalore, India. So Ryan, I'd love to start with you first and share with us the work you do in Melbourne and how can collaborate.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'd like to share how unexpected collaborations can inspire the next generation. Curiosity and innovation begins with a willingness to ask the hard questions and can succeed through creative and often unexpected collaboration. The bringing together of people with different skills, experiences, and ways of seeing the world. At a time when we face increasingly complex global challenges, from mental health and artificial intelligence to climate change and geopolitical uncertainty, no single discipline has all the answers. The future belongs to those who can collaborate across boundaries and inspire future generations. At Science Gallery, we have learned that some of the most powerful ideas emerge when artists, scientists, engineers, and communities from different cultures come together around shared questions. Not because they think alike, but because they think differently. Mental health was a theme of an exhibition at Science Gallery at the University of Melbourne, which explored the future of mental health, well-being, and technology. Mental health is often discussed through the lens of medicine, psychology, and neuroscience. But what happens when artists, medical scientists work together with those of lived experience of mental health? Unexpected outcomes can emerge from collaborations between artists and scientists and can allow us to explore mental health in ways that are emotional, accessible, and deeply human. One artwork that beautifully captures the spirit of curiosity is Doing Nothing with AI by Emmanuel Golab. Developed in consultation with neuroscientist Dr. Akun, the work brings together artistic practice, neuroscience, robotics, and machine learning to explore a surprisingly simple question: what does it mean to do nothing? At a time when artificial intelligence is largely being developed to make us faster, more efficient, and more productive, Golab and his collaborators took a different approach. The installation connects EEG brainwaves with an industrial robotic arm and continually adapts its movements in response to visitors and seeks to encourage our brains to be introspective, daydream, and self-reflect. In a world of constant notifications, endless scrolling, and relentless pressures to optimize every moment of our lives, doing nothing with AI challenges us and asks us to slow down. Collaboration is becoming increasingly important as we navigate a time of multiple interconnecting crises. And our latest exhibition, Emergency, explores another critical question. How do we adapt to a future defined by uncertainty? But it also gives us hope. From bioplastics, from seaweed, to growing plants on other planets, to the regenerative promise of stem cells. And an incredibly compelling work within this exhibition is Tunggul by Dr. Wang, a leading Chinese artist and professor of design at Tsinghua University in Beijing. Tunggul is a speculative video installation and a series of electronic waste sculptures that transports audiences into a post-apocalyptic landscape where humans, animals, and intelligent machine life coexist amongst the remnants of obsolete technology. Rather than just predicting a possible near future, the work invites us to consider, is this a future we want? The project has also been an important intercultural collaboration between China and Australia, sparking curiosity between cultures, and will be included in our global classroom program for school students across the globe. Artists have a unique capacity to engage in future speculation. At a time when many global conversations are shaped by division and uncertainty, curiosity can be a powerful bridge between cultures. The challenges we face today do not stop at national borders, and the solutions we need will not emerge from a single discipline. Our role is to create environments where unlikely collaborations can occur, to create a space where different perspectives, experiences, and ways of knowing can meet, challenge, and be curious with one another. This also inspires the next generation to not see the boundaries that previous generations have often created. If we want to build a more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable future, we need more spaces where artists work with scientists, where technology works with communities, and where countries work with one another. Thank you.
So Ryan shared with us how creativity can come from thoughts or actually doing nothing, which is pretty cerebral. And I now want to take us to the other side of the world and the other side of the spectrum to Miguel in Mexico, who is actually anchored in the physical world. So Miguel, I'd like for you to share with us, how does creativity become a catalyst for innovation?
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Yes, I would like to start my talk talking about what is creativity? How does it start? Creativity is to bring something new, something that didn't exist before, into the world. And it starts with the imagination of the artist or the designer, the creative person. They imagine something unexpected. But to be created, it needs to become real. It needs to be brought into the world in physical reality. And usually the artists use their techniques, traditional techniques, to create the artwork. But that's not yet innovation. So innovation happens when the artist makes a step forward and uses technology, and it's usually, and especially advanced technology, with that imagination, and that spawns the innovation that we want. So creativity plus technology gives us innovation that we want. And I want to talk now about a work in Mexico that, for me, reflects this type of creative innovation that is paradigmatic of what we can look forward, especially for the renewal of our ecosystems. This is the work Coralysis by the Mexican artist Gilberto Esparza. This is a video of how this structure that he created is being placed at the bottom of the ocean in Jalisco, in Mexico, near in front of the coast. Gilberto imagined a structure that could help the coral reefs that had been damaged to renew and to regenerate, to create a house for the new corals. And he imagined this structure made of ceramic modules that can be assembled easily by people in the community, and they can be transported also with boats from the fishermen in the locations. And that creates this space for the corals to regenerate. But he wanted to go a step forward, think, but how can I also encourage this growth and to create the conditions to accelerate the ecosystem? So he imagined, and he talked to biomechanical engineers to create a biomechanical fin that is attached to the structure that moves with the current of the ocean and produces electricity that is distributed across the structure through connectors, metal connectors, and this electricity precipitates minerals from the water. These minerals attach to the ceramic models, and they allow the baby corals to attach to the structure. And not only they attach, there are also nutrients that makes the corals to grow. And that accelerates the growth and in a way that it matches the rate of destruction. And it has been shown to work already. In a few months, you have a whole new ecosystem in place. And that's the drawing of the structure with what he calls the aquafin, and the way that it is transported just with like a local fishermen's boats. And he worked with material engineers to develop these ceramic modules in a way that can, as I mentioned, that can be assembled even by children in the coastal communities. And he also worked with biomechanical engineers, as I mentioned, to create these aquadynamic flow fins. And it's actually very simple technology. It's not like the most advanced one, but it's used in an innovative way. And that opens up new ways for communities to help to restore their own ecosystems. And what use steel carbon connectors also that work to attach and to connect the different modules, but they also have the purpose of distributing the electricity around the system. And that's a tidal wave generator that moves very gently with the wave and it's connected to a generator that creates the electricity that literally jump starts the system to recreate the coral ecosystem. And that's the way where creativity works to create this innovative technology.
Thank you, Miguel. As a material science and engineering professor and a scuba diver, I really find this work so beautiful. And now the next stop on our world tour is India, where Janavi is creating a bridge from science to human journeys, and will share how do experiments actually become experiences.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, Ryan and Miguel, for setting the stage. It makes my job much easier. So what happens when a professor of computational arts, a professor of physics, professors of atmospheric sciences, and a research artist do not walk into a bar, and instead actually come to us at Science Gallery, Bengaluru? They create experiments together, and in the first instance, we turn them into experiences in our exhibitions where we welcome our audiences, like we do in Melbourne and Monterey as well. What I'm going to do is share with you 3 examples of how we meaningfully, I think, put these experiments as experiences in the gallery for our own audiences, and then bring it together at the end. So, the first one, this is Carbon Black by a French artist, Anaïs Tondeux. What she did was she took a long walk in the Fair Isle and also in Bengaluru, carrying out an experiment wearing an N5 mask. All of us have gotten used to those masks, to collect carbon black particles from semi-combustion of hydrocarbons. Working with atmospheric scientists Rita van Dingenen and Jean-Philippe Poutot, she turned this collection of carbon black particles into ink, and then she used that ink to print images of the skies in the areas that she walked. What you see here also alongside a particular print is how carbon black particles show up in Bengaluru, where we live. The global travels of the carbon black particles, asking the participants in our workshop, for example, to experience what happened in Bengaluru. They participated with her. They saw how the ink was produced and then the printing of it as well. So alongside an awareness for climate change, this was also a process that asked questions, that created new things, and most of all, started a conversation. Forester Inclusive by Jane Tingley, who teaches computational arts at York University in Canada. What she did was she put this little pod that looks like an alien creature on a tree on our premises. And this pod was sensing the, what one might call, hidden experience of trees on our premises. Air, so water, wind, carbon dioxide levels, and light being recorded in 24-hour cycles. And the data was then visualized on a regular basis on our premises, where one could actually play with the data visualization to understand how and what kind of data was being captured on an hourly basis. She had, of course, arranged it rather beautifully for the experience to look somewhat like this. And so you see the circularity of the resemblance that, year after year, trees generate, or collect their histories in a circular form. And that's the image that she used also for visualizing the data in the gallery. And so here was an experiment of actually monitoring tree life, the hidden life of trees, and then bringing that experience into the gallery for people to play with and to understand what actually was happening outside. This one, Jivanu, by a professor of physics, Shashi Tutupalli, and Nayan Chakrabarti from the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bangalore. What we have here is an experiment by Krishna Bahadur and S. Ranganayaki from the University of Allahabad, carried out in between the 1950s and 70s, which was an experiment carried out in ambient conditions over 2 decades to create the journey from abiotic soups to spherical units that they call Jivanu, the smallest particle alive. So this was, in some way, an experiment on the origins of life, taking off on Stanley Miller and Harold Urey's experiment in 1952. What they wanted to create in the lab was an atmosphere of early prebiotic Earth, which favored reactions that synthesized complex organic compounds from simple inorganic precursors. This experiment ran for a full year. Our audiences could keep coming back and see the generation of these from prebiotic to kind of amino acid-like spherical creatures in it, and observe them. And we also arranged tours to the lab so that those who were hyper interested in the phenomenon could actually go and talk to Shashi and Nayan. So here's what we've tried to do at Science Gallery Bengaluru. We work with artists who use experiments to create, and then we work with them to create We work with artists who experiment, and we create experiences out of them for our visitors. The experiences then, in turn, create curiosity in the minds of our visitors. And here's what we plan to do with that curiosity. Artists participate in research, they question research, or they speculate on research. And what we want to do at the gallery, in hopefully a year from now, is have a public lab complex with 5 laboratories, a nature lab, a materials lab, a food lab, a theory lab, and a new media lab, where we will be inviting artists and scholars from across the world to come and spend time together, engage in what Ryan called unusual conversations, ask unusual questions of each other, shake each other's confidence a little bit, also build it up further a little bit, and hopefully something new will come out of it. Thank you.
So I'm so inspired by what I'm seeing across the world. And one thing that I was noticing is that you are putting artists with scholars together. But my question is it possible to have an artist and scholar in the same human, just like Da Vinci? And what are some things that we could do to have the next generation actually be an artist and an engineer at the exact same time? So Miguel, I'll start with you.
Well, yes, absolutely, it's possible. You know, one thing that I found that joins science and art is that both like to experiment. And I really like a quote by the German philosopher Friedrich Schelling, who said that experiment is prophecy. And he meant it for science, but it also applies, it applies later to art, in that artists also, especially modern artists, they experiment to prophesying a future. They imagine a future that is going to come, and then they start to experiment to find the solution and the conditions to create that future that we want. And that's also what scientists do. They visualize a future with theories that predict, results, and then they experiment to produce those results. And that way, that both of them, the artist and the scholar, they are experimenting and prophesying this future. And I see that happening in one person. And we know people who are also working like that, that use the experiment of art and the experiments of science to create these innovative futures that we want.
So when I think about experiments, oftentimes people say my experiment failed. And I hate that word fail, because in my mind, if you did an experiment, you had a hypothesis, and it wasn't what you expected it to be, that's actually a win, because you're learning something new. And there's like this growth mindset that needs to be there. We have this amazing teacher in our pottery studio named Jenna Straughter, and she always tells me it's just clay. If you mess it up, just smush it and start over again. So how do we generate that appreciation of failure in scholars, when in reality we are really oftentimes trying to be perfect and have the perfect experiments and get the results that we wanted? And you're smiling, so now we have to turn it to you.
So in fact, it's wonderful that you asked me this question, because I mentioned the public lab complex, and when I'm not putting in a funding proposal, what I refer to it is the failure zone. Because I think this is where you want to incubate ideas. And when you rule out some things as possible and not possible, exactly as you said, you actually move ahead.
We should call it something besides a failure zone. I think celebration of unexpected results.
Or start loving failure, you know, and look at it as just one more step in the journey further that needs to be made. Because it's exactly as you said, you're ruling things out, you're building on it further. And the thing is that, to use a very, very often used cliche, you fail better the next time. Mm-hmm. And it is very, very important to create really a positivity around that word, because how many rockets would have to fail before you launch the very first one?
Quite a few.
Exactly. And so I think loving that word, and say, oh, did you do that? Okay, great. Now let's see, whether this will work. And so instead of success, if we say failed and worked, long time to go.
So one of the challenges, I think, is that we foster in the way in which we do schooling this idea that we have to be perfect, right? You have to get A's, and if you don't get an A, then you are failing. Yep. And so Ryan, why don't you bring you back to when you were a kid and thinking about needing to get those grades to go to school and all that. How do we inspire creativity when we are trying to get students to get A's? Like, how did you get your younger self to be like, I'm going to go and create things and worry less about the grade?
Absolutely. And I think it's an opportunity to perhaps shake up our education system a little bit. I think we're in a traditional, very discipline-based education system globally. I guess that's the role of Science Gallery as well, to break down those arbitrary boundaries. Life is messy, and breaking down those boundaries allows it to be a little bit more realistic of how life is. So to your actual question, yes, me as a young person going on that journey, it's a lot of pressure of making decisions, getting the right grades, but it's also making decisions about what career path you're going to kind of journey on. And to your earlier question, people are often making decisions of, do I want to be a scientist or do I want to be artist quite early on, and diverging. We provide an environment where you can be both. and the importance that you probably will go on a very multidisciplinary career pathway and providing young people with that agency. And part of that is hands-on learning experience, the importance of thinking of science, engineering, technology as creative practice, but also providing space and time for experimentation. And I think that's really important in the learning space and perhaps takes the pressure off of just getting those perfect grades.
I love this because even in the museum space, you have art museums, you have science museums.
Yep.
And what I love is that you guys have both in your galleries. And so for those of us who are raising the next generation, what advice would you give to us to make sure that we are not pigeonholing them into being science or artists, but to actually create all of them? If there's like one piece of advice you'd give to aspiring parents, what would you say to really get them to create the next Da Vinci's of the world? So you're smiling again, so I've got to go with you, John.
Get out of the way. Get out of the way.
What does that mean?
It means it means doing doing as little as possible to reinforce what already the world is sort of expecting of them. And then gently support any, what one might call disruptive or deviating thinking, and just be there and say, okay, find your path.
And give them a ton of art supplies while they're doing that.
Oh,
too.
absolutely. Give them a ton of, give them Lego, give them Meccano, give them, art supplies, give them everything that you possibly can, if you can bring it in, and then just leave them alone.
Miguel?
Well, you have to also foster your own curiosity always, because that if you have that curiosity and then you share that with your child, I mean, children have curiosity by themselves, but if they feel that you're sharing it with them, that really will flourish, and they will feel it is good to be curious, and to learn and to practice and to fail and to keep trying again. So I think it has to do with a lot with us ourselves and our attitude towards curiosity.
And how do you yourself not worry about failure?
Yeah, good question.
Just tell the world stage.
You have to learn to, I practice judo and for many years, and one thing that you learn in judo is you need to lose the fear to fall. Because if you don't learn how to fall, you're always tight and you will hurt yourself, and you will never learn to throw neither. So you really need to learn how to fall and to let go in order to succeed as well. So I think that's, for me, the big lesson there. Like, okay, you learn to fail and enjoy it, and get up and let's do it again.
So Ryan, take us home. What's your advice?
Building upon what Jambi and Miguel have said, I would say absolutely giving young people agency around how they explore the world. It's a challenging place out there locally and globally. So how do we give young people that agency? And part of that is equipping young people to question, ask questions as they navigate the world as well.
And what's your favorite question to ask when you're navigating things?
Probably a very childlike question, why?
Oh, why? Oh, the forever why?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to really thank you for this conversation. There's a few ideas that have really stood out for me in listening to you all speak, which is that art and science are one, right? You can't really say that they're not interchangeable, because they are. Secondly, it's important to not be afraid and to just try new things. And failure is not a failure. It's just a hypothesis which you tested and it came out with something different, and that is a learning. And that if you really think about where the world is going, the more we have these innovators who are colliding science and technology, it leads to innovation, right? If you can bring art into it. And so the more we can foster that, the better off we are. And so I really wanted to thank the three of you for joining us here. For those of you who are online and listening to us, thank you for joining. And for those of you who are here in person, please go downstairs to see the beauty of the work that they have been doing. I had a chance to work with the AI robot and try to meditate, and I realized I need to do more of that. So for those of you who also need to do more of that, which is most people in the World Economic Forum, you really should go down there and spend some time to learn how to do nothing, which I think all of us are failing at, but we're going to get better at it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. 大家早上好，财新和 W.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Caixin Debate.
Debate in Dalian this morning. I'm Li Xing, the managing editor of Caixin Global. And our session today is called Faster Drugs, Better Access, ? And let me define that a little bit. A decade ago, China was largely a manufacturing base for genetic drugs. But today, it accounts to roughly a quarter of the world's innovative drug pipeline. And in addition to that, the average upfront value of licensing deal between Western and Chinese biopharma has risen 230% in the last 4 years. One of Caixin's cover story last year was titled, China's innovative drugs are embracing their own deep-seek moment, ? Again. And we have a very distinguished panel today to help us answer those questions and put the answer to those question marks and help us to define why big is not necessarily same as good and what does it really take for the faster actually to mean that more people will benefit from this. Let me introduce our panelists today. Starting from my left-hand side is Giovanni Caforio, the chairman of the board of directors for Novartis. And Gong Yingying is the founder and chairlady of EduTech. And Professor Ren Minghui is professor of School of Public Health at Peking University and also serving 7 years at WHO and especially covering the COVID period. And last but not least is Eric Xie, is the CEO of SBP Group and one of the largest Chinese biopharma. And let me start with Giovanni, if I can. Novartis has a front row seat in China's evolution. from a manufacturing base to an innovative partner. What is your perspective on how the innovation ecosystem has evolved?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lenny. It's a really interesting topic, obviously very, very important for Novartis. In fact, our roots in China date back 140 years. So we have been committed to China for a long time, and China is the second operation in the world for Novartis. We are the number 2 MNC here. And our presence, of course, there is a commercial unit, which is very important in the company, but we have significant manufacturing presence. In fact, we have just announced or are in the process of executing significant investments, 600 million RMBs for a new radioligand facility in Haiyan, and we also are investing in a significant expansion of our existing manufacturing footprint to be ready to manufacture biologics as well in Changping. So strong commitment and presence there. What I'm most excited about is the fact that we actually conduct over 100 clinical trials in China, and we've been one of the first companies among multinationals to adopt parallel development of all of our new medicines in China at the same time as other countries around the world, including Europe and the US. And now we've reached the point that we actually have parallel submission to regulatory authorities worldwide. And I'm saying all of this because actually it tells well the story of how Novartis is embedded in the innovation ecosystem here in China. And so to answer your question now, of course, we've seen tremendous progress. The development of a scientific infrastructure, which is clearly world-class, adoption of international standards from a regulatory perspective, from a clinical trials conduct perspective, many other different elements, and most important, as always, great talent in China. And so I think at this point we are clearly seeing China as one of the global ecosystems for the development of innovative pharmaceuticals. And so our objective now is to really think about China as also being globally connected as an innovation ecosystem with other centers at Novartis where we do research and development, but also with other academic institutions and other ecosystems of true innovation around the world. So tremendous progress we've seen over the last few years and clearly accelerating as we speak.
Very exciting, and we'll come back to some of the points that you mentioned. But let me turn to the homegrown big pharma, Eric. So tell us more about the SVP Group, and especially from your standpoint, what drove the transformation in China's pharmaceutical side? Was that better science, better system, or simply scale and speed?
Thank you for your question. So just some brief introduction on SVP. So we're one of the largest biopharma in China right now. We really transitioned from very early on in the 1990s from just doing generics into the 2010s where we started our innovative development research and the entire rise of the innovation. So our innovation sales really went from 0% to right now over the past 5-6 years to right now about 50% of our total revenue. And then as always, also really focusing on R&D into from, let's say, when it's just like 6% of our total revenue right now to over like 20%. So we're spending right now over 6 billion RMB every year into R&D right now. We really grew from a company where in the past it's more, until now also it's like basic care for the entire national population, focusing on hepatitis right now to oncology, hepatitis, respiratory, surgery, analgesics, and also cardiovascular metabolic. So these are the areas that we're really focusing in. And then through the past years, I think we've created some of the blockbusters For example, Emutinib, Ganmei, focusing on lung cancer, and also it's just a cancer of multiple types. And these years, we're seeing more and more breakthrough therapies, not only in oncology, but also in hepatitis, as well as in surgery analgesics as well. And then I think some of the successful points for us past years is really transforming from a generic base, a blended company, into an innovative-driven company. So we reformed our TAs in 2020. So when we really focused from maybe over 10 areas into right now into 5 TAs in particular, and also reforming our entire R&D as well as manufacturing and commercial team into a shift of innovation focused. So before we're more blended in a way that everything is mixed together. But right now it's like for our entire R, we have our innovative oncology platforms. We have 3 of them. Also from the M&A last year of Lenovo and Hezia that we brought in new talents as well. Last year, our P1 VEGF was sold to MS Global Rights was sold to MSD with $4 billion total package and an $888 million upfront. I think this is a very start for our global footprint as well. And this year with Sanofi, we did like a Jack Rock deal with $1.5 billion USD, $135 million upfront. So I think starting to have deals with MNC also means that your R&D capability is being recognized by global, since the standard right there, I think even right now, there's only dozens that really pass the DD with MNCs. And also, we're one of the only company that not only did license out, but also did a lot of license in. So I think with a lot of MNC's compliance issues and local capability, we've partnered with Boehringer Ingelheim, as well as on GSK on oncology and on hepatitis. This is also a full recognition. So for SBP, in the past, we're very China-focused, but through the past couple of years, we started our global footprints, especially with like continuing in future development. I think it's a decade of partnership, and more partnerships means advancing in not only in your local market development, but also global market development. So as a big pharma, I think what is really important is number one is your pipeline, and number two is your distribution. So in China in the past, it's just like most of the companies are only focused in pipeline and distribution in China. But right now we see the advancement of China moving forward to not only having a China pipeline, but having a global pipeline. So last year we can see there's like 130 billion deal size from China going out. And also China right now takes over the largest clinical operation. I think almost doubling of that happening outside in maybe the States. So around 40% of the globe. So I think this is also one of the advancements of China have really speeding up. So I think this discovery excellence as well as R&D development excellence and the speed, and also with the population and with the regulatory on helping to excel the standards and also the quality of all the data and getting more recognized by global, I think really means a lot for Chinese continued advancement at this point. In the future, I think there will be more and more Chinese company having the capability of setting up global pipeline, and maybe through collaborations, through partnerships, to look into distribution on the global scale. And I really have a very strong confidence that China has the capability of also leading some of the maybe global trials, MRCTs, slowly, and focusing on some of the developing countries as well. Maybe starting some new markets, developing markets, then doing crossover bridging maybe to the globe. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive picture of what you are doing and your vision, and especially on the opportunities for Chinese homegrown pharma globally as well. I bring the perspective of Professor Zhen. Help us put that in context. The 140-year story of Novartis in China and witnessing the growth, and a 30-year almost incredible growth trajectory of the homegrown pharma. That's on the supply side. How about the demand side? So are people already benefited from the better drugs and more drugs?
Thank you very much for the question. Probably my answer is yes and no. Yes, of course. I think that all the population in the world, including China and other countries, benefit from this huge innovation in biomedicine. There's no doubt. We see so many new technical solutions, new medicine in cancer, in diabetes, and many sort of problems we are facing. But clearly, we also understand that we still have a lot of problems in terms of threat. We don't have a technical solution, even diagnosis, vaccine, and the medicines, which clearly demonstrates there's not a line between the pharmaceutical industry and this huge need from population and public health perspectives. Even though we have many sort of medicines and vaccine, clearly, unfortunately, many population in low resources setting cannot easily access and afford to this technical solution. That's why we have huge public health problem in low resource country, in Africa and the other Asian country. That's exactly the problem that we're talking about, equity in global health. So we call this kind of problems, even we call this a vaccine preventive disease, but we have a vaccine, but clearly look at the diseases still be leading killers in many countries. But on the other hand, let me emphasize probably how exactly we can make sure that public health interests can be supported with pharmaceutical interest in terms of commercial demands. It is true, we understand, of course, R&D and the pipeline, as we hear from Eric, is huge, important, has been invested a lot by every manufacturer company, not in China, also by other countries. But why the gap still exists? What I understand probably is the market. Probably market cannot solve every issue in terms of technical innovation. And maybe I can give you an example. That's the antimicrobial resistance, and we understand, we call AMR in short. We have huge problems for time being that AMR resistance, antibiotic resistance, threat all over the world, not only in high-income country, also for low-income country as well. As I mean, we don't have enough antibiotics to fold all the world to face the new emerging infectious diseases. The reason is the pipeline in these areas is very inefficient, not only because of long-term investment, which is needed by all the R&D manufacturers and also by the scientists. And also, when the problem is how exactly we can make sure when the new infectious, when the new antibiotic will be available in the market, how exactly we can support, make sure that products can deliver to the far-reaching and the most-needed population and the population. That's exactly the question. And also because we have so many public, private funding policy and mechanisms trying to use this funding to support this vaccines and new infectious disease solution to the right population, and then the price can be reasonably reduced. But in that regard, many sort of giant manufacturers, they probably lose the interest because they don't see the profit, which is can cover in terms of R&D in the past 10 or 12 years, which is huge, we understand. So how exactly make sure there's mechanisms can be built and strengthened between public, that's government, and international organization like WHO and other funding mechanism with private. That's not normally is kicked off initially by manufacturers and scientists. So that's exactly the mechanism we are looking forward to make sure scientists and the market and the people who can benefit from whole the circle of enjoy for the fast development, also easy and affordable access to the population and low resources setting. So that's why I answer your question yes and no. There's huge distance. That's why we need collaboration and with all 6 stakeholders. We don't have a solution, but actually we are much better in comparison with 20 years ago. But now we need more collaboration, more global support. Unfortunately, because of the geopolitical issue and the huge budget cut by many donors, that's why we are facing new crises in these very important areas.
Thank you. Thank you for that very comprehensive picture, especially involving a lot more stakeholders into the discussion and also introducing the very core of the challenge that public health is at the same time is public goods, and also we need sustainable industry as well. Let me introduce Ying. So tell us more about eDo, what you do, and what kind of tech solution you bring to the table, especially things we're going to talk about drugs today. You sit on a lot of patient data, and that can accelerate drug development. And in reality, how does that work?
So I started eDo in 2014, and but before 2014, I actually did 2 years of field work in Japan and Israel and US. And my idea was I want to know that if I do a massive homogeneous data infrastructure, and is that going to be helpful for the high value use cases in the healthcare sector? If it's going to be helpful, then we can bring down the entire cost of healthcare. So I went to visit the NEC in Japan because they're the largest EMR provider, and also Israel has a big national data platform at the time in 2012, and also UCLA hospitals and Harvard hospitals were all trying to build something called a data infrastructure. And also so there are a lot of PPT, like the patient timeline, which we later developed to patient copilot. And trial studies on the data infrastructure, E2E, like enterprise to enterprise. Hospital is directly linked. Their trial information is directly linked to the pharma. So I saw how they want to do it, and I saw and a lot of ideas that we can roughly get there. But so I came back to China, and at the time when I start writing my BP, I realized there are 4,000 health IT companies in China, and each hospital would have 60 to 200 systems. So if you multiply the number of systems in different hospitals and the 4,000 health IT companies is massive, and that's why for the first almost 8 years, I think 2018. Our company was started in 2014. We only earned our first penny in 2018. And it's a lot of pressure for a startup company. And that's because already more than $150 million US gone, and we're still building our data infrastructure. And because unless you have the use cases, you don't see the data infrastructure. And a lot of people ask me, what is a data infrastructure? Because I believe the future of healthcare AI have a few layers. One obviously is the GPU, and the second layer is the foundational model, which I believe only a very few companies would win the final competition if they manage the next trillion or whatever investments. And the next layer will be healthcare foundational model, because healthcare does have a privacy, compliance, and a lot of safety concerns that we need to build in on top of the healthcare model. And on top of that, I believe there's something called high quality data pool. What I mean by high quality data pool is almost equivalent as evidence layer, because raw data, raw result is not evidence. Traceable, continuous, being able to monitor the data, as well as all your algorithm is how you process all this data is transparent. Then you can turn it to evidence, and only on top of the evidence we can have an AI agent that is responsible and restrained within the safety zone. So coming back to drug development, we're quite lucky that now we work with thousands and thousands of hospitals. Out of the top 200 hospitals in Fudan ranking list, we work with almost 150, and they use our data infrastructure, and they also use our IGCP infrastructure. The IGCP, there are 400 GCP sites in China. So because of the new boom of biotech doing their trials in China, so a lot of the top hospitals are trying to increase their capacity by adopting more technology and AI. And so we just outgrow our data infrastructure from the main hospital into the GCP sites. And it does wonders on things like protocol trial designs, patient recruitment, supervision, and also E2E, like a hospital directly linked with the pharma, as well as a lot of the studies. So I think we're getting there, but it's a slow process. But I don't see another better, more efficient way.
Very good. And it's evident that the patients will eventually pay off. And also that leads us into the next round of the question, which is revolving around tech, since you bring tech into the discussion. Come back to Giovanni, that the speed of pharmaceutical and healthcare innovation driven by emergent technology is really accelerating. How do we, at the same time, expand patient access to these therapies?
Well, it's a really important question because I always say if we develop a medicine that doesn't actually have an impact on the life of a patient, that's not a very helpful medicine. So access is critical. And Novartis is one of the world leaders in ensuring access to medicines. We rank #1 in the access to medicines index globally because it has been a priority for the company for a long time. And I think it's particularly important because I believe it was mentioned before, but there may be even more important challenges when it comes to new complex technologies. We are investing in radioligand therapies, cell and gene therapy, RNA therapeutics, and each one of them has its own challenges and complexities. And I can give you an example with long-acting RNA therapeutics, where we are now able to administer products that can be given once every 6 months, potentially in the future once a year. And I think that's very beneficial for hospital systems, but it is actually not aligned at all with the way in which hospitals reimburse medicines, which is based much more on a single administration on a daily basis, rather than a cost that may be upfront much higher, but then it actually spans across 6 months in terms of the value it generates. So it's a good example of the fact that one of the key drivers of ensuring access to medicines is actually really looking at how to evolve the healthcare infrastructure and the way in which healthcare is delivered. And so, I think when you think about innovation, it goes all the way from pharmaceutical discovery, but also has to go to, do we have the right healthcare infrastructure? Do we have the right investment in healthcare? Are hospitals being prepared over time to actually adopt new technology so that patients can benefit? And I think it brings me to an important point, which is the fact that actually patient access to medicines is very much multidisciplinary. It requires the innovator, but it requires the policymaker, the healthcare delivery companies, of course, public healthcare infrastructures, all of them working together with the objective that if the patient is at the center, then you need to design everything that is around the patient in a way that facilitates a new technology reaching the patient at the time in which that patient needs it. And I really do believe it is a responsibility of every stakeholder in healthcare to be really thinking about that in a very patient-centric way. And for us and for innovators in general, it actually requires us to think about patient access when we design our molecules, when we design our clinical trials, when we interact with regulators. So it starts more than 10 years before we can even imagine a medicine going to market and commercially reaching patients. It is embedded into the entire continuum of research and development. I think that's really a mindset more than anything else, but it is definitely something we can't do alone. It requires deep collaboration. I believe you used the word collaboration before. I think that's critical whenever innovation accelerates and the potential benefit to patient is significantly greater, then I think it's actually an imperative for all of us to work together even more and even better than before.
So help me understand better how during the innovation process that the access is baked into the design. Is that more on the price point or on how that can be deployed or disseminated or?
I think it's in multiple different dimensions. So of course, it starts with really understanding what the unmet medical need is in a disease. What are the barriers to patients being treated effectively when they have a disease? Sometimes, it is about diagnosis, which is not effectively done. Sometimes it's the site of care, because some patients may be challenged in reaching hospitals because they may be too far from hospitals. Sometimes it's the endpoint. In some diseases, we have to design our clinical trials to take into account the symptoms that are really important to the quality of life of patients, to make sure they're motivated to take a therapy. And for that, for example, we actually have patients participate in the design of some of the clinical trials. But then, of course, it's ensuring that the right diagnostic is in place, the physicians are trained, their reimbursement systems are put in place. Sometimes, there is really no investment in diagnosing a disease if there is no effective treatment. All of a sudden, when a treatment becomes available, then we need